Chapter 470. Although I still don't know the true identity of the enemies, I have a good understanding of them. Maeve said to Wooming. Maeve was the queen of Connaught, and she had more than just charm. Among them, the soldiers of the Yellow Grail are the most special. Maeve pointed to the area below the Great Lakes. Their soldiers are Dragon Fang soldiers. From the quality of their battle, there is no doubt that they are the Dragon Fang soldiers that can only be created by the magicians of the gods. However, I don't know if these Dragon Fang soldiers were created by the Traitor Witch. After all, Maeve had not fully understood the situation. Dragon Fang soldiers were skeleton soldiers summoned by the dragon's fangs. The reason why Maeve said whether they were created by the Traitor Witch was because of the magic. Legend has it that the summoning of dragon fangs was a family heirloom magic of the Greek king of Colchis. It was passed down to the princess of Colchis, Medea, who learned magic from the goddess Hecate. In the later generations, she was also known as the Traitor Witch. However, Demetrius was not the only one who knew how to use Dragon Fang soldiers. Wooming had also encountered servants who used Dragon Fang soldiers. During the War of the 14 Knights, Empress Semiramis's noble phantasm stored a large number of Dragon Fang soldiers. The number was beyond imagination. Therefore, it cannot be defined based on this clue. Anyway, this Yellow Grail was related to Greece, so it was temporarily named the Greek Grail. Then, Maeve pointed her slender finger to the bottom of the American continent on the map. In the Mississippi Plains, the Grail forces there have ordinary soldiers, but if I'm not mistaken, their emblem is a mother wolf nursing a baby. After Maeve finished, Wooming nodded. That means this is the army of Rome. The founder of Rome, Romulus, was raised by a mother wolf. Legend has it that the emblem of Rome at that time was a mother wolf nursing a baby. That's right, I still know about Rome. After all, Rome was established much earlier than Maeve's era. Even Maeve had a general understanding of the situation on the other side of the coast. However, I don't know which emperor it is. Maeve smiled. She did not care about this, and then she hugged Wooming again. In her opinion, as long as her king was here, all enemies were nothing. Ahem. Let's call this force the Rome force for now. What about this place? Wooming coughed, then pointed to the Rocky Mountains and the eastern mountainous area. This was the third Holy Grail force. What are you talking about? There are no soldiers. My Fu loosened her grip on Wooming's arm and continued to explain. Due to the distance, although I don't know which faction it is, I can still sense it through the connection between the Holy Grails. After a slight pause, Maeve continued. In addition to the fact that the other two factions didn't take over the mountain range, this third faction, the Holy Grail faction, took over the mountain range that no one cared about. Maeve's army was merely observing from the top of the Appalachian Mountains. They did not have a deep understanding of the situation. He was lucky to be able to see the Dragon Tooth soldiers and the Roman emblem. That's because only these two forces are constantly fighting in the northern part of the Mississippi Plains. No matter if it's Lionhead's native forces in the United States, the third additional Holy Grail force in the Green area, or our Celtic forces, none of them have made any moves. In other words, it's now a turf war between the Greeks and Romans. After digesting this information, Wooming said helplessly, "This is really a mythical war now. Celtic, Greece, Rome, the United States, and an unknown force." There was no doubt that these were all surprises brought by the Magic King for Wooming, surprises that gave Wooming a headache. But I'm a cheating player, Magic King. Then, Wooming issued an order. That's it for the time being, Maeve. Our side will stay in the eastern part of the American continent. Yes, my king, now. Wooming was really like a king, and Maeve, the queen, began to listen to him. Then, I'll go meet the Greek and Roman soldiers first. You stay here and watch over our home. With that, Wooming picked Maeve up and placed her on the seat. He then strode out of the room, leaving Maeve alone in the room. It doesn't matter if he's not the Mad King. The Holy King Sai is really handsome. Our home. Just like that, the seductive and wanton queen turned into a shy young girl who was yearning for love. In the corridor, Wooming walked without saying a word. In order to maintain his dignity, Wooming used the corner of his eyes to look at the soldiers with his face guarding the corridor and felt a sense of powerlessness. Why did I believe her in the first place? Wu Ming whispered in a voice that only he could hear. What Wu Ming was talking about was naturally the time when he gave Maeve his blood essence to create the cyborgs. But even so, Wu Ming also led this group of cyborgs into battle. I didn't feel ashamed at the time. Was I in a state similar to Chinibu at the time? Shaking his head and his heart, Wu Ming gave up thinking about nonsense. When he walked to the gate of the White House, Wu Ming waved his arm, and a blood-red cloak appeared behind the pure white holy armor. The blood-red cloak matched with the holy armor, but did not become dirty. Instead, it highlighted Wu Ming's holiness even more. Farewell, Holy King. Suddenly, all the Celtic soldiers with Wu Ming's face knelt down and roared at Wu Ming. Wu Ming was startled. What the hell is with this roar? It's as if they want to beat up Wu Ming. I can only say that they are indeed Celts, however, for the sake of his dignity, Wu Ming did not show any surprise. Wu Ming responded indifferently. Then, with a wave of his hand, a pure, white, holy spear appeared in his hand. Wu Ming tossed the holy spear in his hand, and it transformed into a pure white deer beast smaller than Funbaba. But don't be mistaken, Wu Ming's Funbaba was left behind in Uruk. This was only because Wu Ming transformed the holy spear in his current state. In short, it was still the holy spear, Yggdrasil, but in a different shape. Wu, the deer beast, lightly responded, and Wu Ming immediately jumped onto the deer beast's back. Wu Ming, who was wearing armor, looked extremely suitable riding on the deer beast that was much smaller than Funbaba. After all, this was the mount that Wu Ming transformed into himself, so it was definitely suitable. Wu, the deer beast responded softly again and carried Wu Ming into the distance. That was the location of the Appalachian Mountains. Wu Ming planned to cross the Appalachian Mountains directly to his destination, the northern Mississippi plains where constant battles occurred. Chapter 471. At the top of the Appalachian Mountains, Wu Ming rode his deer beast to the top of the mountain. Then, Wu Ming jumped off the deer beast and looked into the distance. Ka-ka! Along with a cracking sound, the helmet on Silent Cry's head that looked like it had grown dragon horns automatically separated like Mordred's helmet, attaching itself to his shoulders and back. Wu Ming, who finally revealed his head, couldn't help but take a deep breath. Phew, the air in the mountains is indeed very cool. Wu Ming looked around with his eyes that had turned golden because of the Holy King. It's called the Great Mythological War, and it's not wrong at all. Wu Ming could clearly feel that the mana density of this singularity was continuously increasing. Although it was probably because of the Magic King, but is the excessive use of the Holy Grail a side effect on the singularity? Wu Ming pondered. After all, how do you think the Dragon Fang soldiers, Roman soldiers, and Wu Ming Celtic soldiers were mass-produced? Even Maeve wouldn't be able to summon enough soldiers to occupy half of America in a short period of time without using the Holy Grail. It was probably the same for the Dragon Fang and Roman soldiers. I wonder how many loan servants there are on this continent, Wu Ming said as he looked down at the battlefield that seemed to have already begun. Wu Ming learned from Roman that the Holy Grail of every singularity would summon a lot of loan servants. Therefore, Wu Ming was thinking about the loan servants. If we can rope him in, he will be of great help to the Chica. However, he had to have the opportunity to meet a good lone follower. Then, Wu Ming closed his helmet and sat on the white deer beast again. Oh! Wu Ming rode the deer and galloped toward the foot of the mountain. His scarlet cape fluttered in the wind, making rustling noises. At the foot of the mountain, not far from the northern battlefield of the Mississippi Plains, in the north was a group of ferocious-looking skeleton soldiers that didn't look human, the dragon-tooth soldiers. Some of the dragon-teeth soldiers were holding large bone blades, some were holding long bone spears, and some were holding curved bone bows. They were arranged in an extremely orderly manner. In the south was a group of Roman soldiers wearing old but tough leather armor. The Roman soldiers were basically armed with spears, shields, and short swords at their waists. Both armies were heavily guarded, and there were no commanders in sight. It was as if they were about to engage in a daily battle. Both armies moved and began to attack each other. The vanguard of both sides made contact. There was no flashy exchange of blows. It was just a mutual attack of you with a saber, and I with a spear, you with a sword, and I with a shield. It had to be said that such a battle was merely a matter of who had more troops. However, for both sides who possessed the Holy Grail, this was indeed a terrible idea. Therefore, after such a long battle, it was time for them to change their strategy. For example, taking a picture of a general or something. Roar! All of a sudden, an inhuman roar sounded from behind the Dragon Fang soldiers. Then, a huge black figure jumped into the camp of the Roman soldiers. Boom! When the black figure landed in the camp of the Roman soldiers, it directly caused a violent impact to the Roman soldiers. Roar! The black figure roared again. It was holding a strange stone axe. It was a 5-meter tall figure. Its whole body was naked, and only the lower half of its body was wearing a tattered combat uniform. Its naked body had a healthy dark complexion. Its muscles were bound, and its wrists and ankles were shackled. His eyes were filled with madness. Without a doubt, this was a berserker. If Wuming was here, he would definitely be surprised. This was the berserker that they met in Winterwood City. His real name was Hercules. Hercules was constantly waving his axe and sword as he began to massacre the Roman soldiers. It had to be said that a berserker was indeed a berserker. His destructive power was not to be underestimated. In just a few minutes, more than half of the Roman soldiers were killed or injured. However, since the Dragon Fang soldiers had already sent a general, the Roman soldiers had no choice but to send a general as well. Immediately afterward, a red-eyed man, wearing ancient golden Roman armor, a battle skirt, and a tattered red cloak behind him rushed over with a roar. He seemed to be a berserker as well. Ow, ow, ow. Roar! The two berserkers roared at each other and began to fight. The Greek berserker swung his huge axe and sword and attacked the Roman berserker. On the other hand, the Roman berserker was not afraid of pain. He carried his axe and sword and attacked the Greek berserker. The two berserkers with similar strength and durability were fighting each other just like that. After a few moves, the Roman berserker was clearly at a disadvantage and was beginning to be suppressed by the Greek berserker. There was no doubt that if there were no reinforcements or something special happened, Rome's berserker would definitely die. Ow, ow, ow! The Roman berserker roared unwillingly. Suddenly, a ray of moonlight appeared in the sky and shone around the Roman berserker. That was the Roman berserker's noble phantasm. It could cause mental damage to the enemies in the surrounding area. Roar! It could only be said that Hercules was indeed worthy of his name. Even if he had gone berserk, it could be said that because he had gone berserk, the enemy's noble phantasm had no effect on him. However, the surrounding Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers could not. The Roman soldiers began to go berserk. Ka-da-ka-da-ka-da. The Dragon Fang soldiers also went berserk. Then, the Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers who were affected by the Roman berserker's noble phantasm began to attack Hercules crazily. Roar! Ants could even kill an elephant. However, to Hercules, these soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers were not ants. At most, they could only affect Hercules. Hercules crazily crushed these soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers and began to attack indiscriminately. As long as they were close to him, they would be smashed into pieces by Hercules' axe. However, the Roman berserker was also among them, constantly attacking Hercules. The Roman berserker, who could match Hercules' strength, could cause damage to Hercules with every attack. This was what they meant by ants could kill an elephant. Of course, that referred to Hercules being attacked by the Roman berserker. At that moment, there was a sudden magical fluctuation not far away from the two servants, and the two berserkers could not help but look over there. With a flash of light, two figures appeared in the same place. Reiki transfer normal. Tachika, Matthew, you have come to the United States in 1783. Roman's voice came from Gadotzi's wrist. It was Matthew who was wearing Chaldea's master clothes and Galahad's Reiki suit. Doctor, are you sure this is the United States in 1783? Gadotsi and Matthew looked at the battlefield in horror. Was there such a fierce battle in the United States at that time? Coincidentally, Hercules and Rome's berserker were looking at the two unknown enemies who had entered the battlefield. Gadotsi and Matthew could not help but swallow their saliva. It feels like we're finished. Chapter 472. Roar. Ah! Hercules and Rome's berserker roared in unison, as if they were extremely angry at their former enemy, who had suddenly entered the battlefield. It's over. That's Hercules and Caligula. Gadotsi shouted in a panic. They were the enemies that Gadotsi and Matthew encountered at the second and third singularities. As if they also had an impression of Gadotsi and Matthew, Hercules and Caligula roared and ran towards the two. "Senior, please step back." Matthew raised his shield and stood in front of Gadotsi. Hercules raised his axe and sword and smashed it down at Matthew. Clang! The sword and axe collided with the holy shield, producing an ear-piercing sound. Huh! After blocking Hercules' attack, Matthew shouted and pushed Hercules away. After experiencing 4 singularities, Matthew had indeed become a lot stronger. Hercules was a humanoid Gundam whose strength had reached A+. Even though it was not easy for Matthew to block his full-powered attack, he was still able to do so. "Senior, it's too dangerous here. Prepare to break out of the battlefield," Matthew said to Gadotsi without looking back. Gadotsi was not an idiot. The Dragonfang soldiers and Roman soldiers had begun to surround them. No matter what, they had to leave the battlefield first. When a scholar meets a soldier, it is difficult to reason with him. This was probably the case. No matter which side it was, there was no way to communicate with them at the moment, so it was best to leave now. Ah! "Senior," Matthew shouted and stood in front of Caligula, who wanted to attack Gadotsi. "Doctor, is Miss Pamilia not ready yet?" Gadotsi quickly said to her wrist while Matthew blocked Caligula. Pamilia was sleeping because of the habits of vampires, so she did not follow Matthew and others. "It's too late, Tachika. Although it's a bit irresponsible to say this now, we can only rely on you and Matthew now." Roman's helpless voice came from the watch. "Ah, really? If only Assassin was here," Gadotsi complained. As if the heavens were playing a joke, a rather huge source of magic was quickly approaching them. It was the power of light, the extreme light that could illuminate all darkness. "Tachika, Matthew, there's a huge source of magic approaching you. It's impossible to determine whether it's an enemy or not. Be careful," Roman said excitedly. "Doctor, we've already seen it here," Gadotsi complained to Roman. In the east of the battlefield, like the rising sun, a fierce light shone and quickly impacted the camps of both sides. Roar dash! Oh! Hercules, who was about to attack Gadotsi again, and Caligula, who was blocked by Matthew, both turned their heads and looked at the light. It seems that the two berserkers judged that this light was more to be targeted than the enemy. Hercules and Caligula gave up attacking Gadotsi and Matthew and headed towards the source of the light in the east. "Anyway, we're saved," Gadotsi sighed. However, even without the two threats of Hercules and Caligula, the surrounding Dragonfang soldiers and Roman soldiers were not to be trifled with. Surprisingly, the quality of these two soldiers was quite high. Matthew used a shield to knock away one enemy after another, and quickly said to Gadotsi, "Senior, let's take advantage of this opportunity to break through." Because of Hercules' hammer and Caligula's noble phantasm, the Roman soldiers and Dragonti soldiers around Gadotsi and Mashu were not gathered together. Therefore, they were confident to break through the encirclement. "Quick, Matthew, let's leave quickly." Then, Matthew covered Gadotsi, and the two broke through to the west. Why break through to the west? What a joke! The light in the east was not to be trifled with. If they didn't hurry to the west, they would be waiting for death. Because of this, Gadotsi and Wuming were getting farther and farther away in the east, where the light was. Silent Wonder held the holy white spear in his hand and destroyed the Roman soldiers and Dragonfang soldiers that were rushing forward as if he was unparalleled. With this level of soldiers, the enemy must have used the Holy Grail, Wu Ming said while mowing the grass. Although Wu Ming was mowing the grass, the strength of these Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers was already very high. Wu Ming had also encountered Dragon Fang soldiers, but compared to these Dragon Fang soldiers, those Dragon Fang soldiers were simply broken bones. Naturally, the Roman soldiers who were comparable to the Dragon Fangs were also extremely strong. Simply put, the original green monsters with good quality had become orange monsters with epic quality. In any case, they're just mass-produced soldiers. Not to mention the Dragon Fang soldiers, the Roman soldiers were exactly the same, and there was no fear in them. There is no doubt that they were summoned using the Holy Grail. It was the same as Wu Ming's Celtic soldiers. It's about time. Using normal attacks to clear the monsters was too slow, so Wu Ming prepared to use a skill. Silent Wonder swept away all the enemies around him. Then he pointed the Holy Lance Yggdrasil downwards and stabbed it into the ground. Feel the radiance of the Holy King, Wu Ming said as he injected magic into the Holy Spear. Boom! In an instant, the magic of light was released and overturned the soldiers in the ground, causing a violent explosion. The scorching light purified the enemies in the ground. Wu Ming stood in a large crater that looked like it was hit by a meteorite and pulled out the holy spear that was still stuck in the ground. Holy King's Radiance. Ace the descent of the Holy King. The radiance of mercy accompanied the Holy King. The effect could be said to be similar to the Ghost Seed Demon skill. It was a combination of natural demon, strange strength, charm, magic release, and so on. Wu Ming used the effect of the light magic release. It had to be said that the effect was outstanding. Wu Ming's attack just now almost changed the terrain of the northeastern Mississippi plains, and the attacking Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers were basically wiped out. Roar! Oh! Suddenly, two different roars were heard, and two figures appeared at the edge of the crater. Is that Hercules and the unknown berserker? Wu Ming knew Hercules because he had met him before. However, Wu Ming really did not know Berserker, who was like an emperor. However, this did not hinder Wu Ming. Both of them did not come with good intentions. Mythical Yggdrasil. Chapter 473. Mythical Yggdrasil. Wu Ming didn't say anything and directly released the true name of the Holy Spear. The originally solid Holy Spear in his hand seemed to have turned into light, shining with infinite brilliance. Even Hercules and Caligula couldn't help but raise their arms to block the dazzling brilliance. Pure brilliance, holy world tree, help me purify the evil. Wu Ming shouted loudly and threw the aurora pillar in his hand like a javelin at Caligula. After all, Wu Ming didn't know Caligula well and didn't know if he was a strong threat. But Wu Ming knew that Hercules could resurrect 11 times, and he would be immune to all attacks he had received. Therefore, Wu Ming chose to get rid of Caligula, the unknown berserker, first. Ah! The intense pain made Caligula roar. The spear of light hit Caligula's body at a speed that Caligula couldn't react to. It passed through his body and left a glowing hole in his body. Bang! Then, Caligula exploded and overturned Hercules, who didn't have time to leave Caligula's side. This was the power of Wu Ming. No, it should be the light of the Holy King. At this point, the Roman berserker, Caligula, was eliminated. Roar! Hercules got up and roared at Wu Ming. Next, it's your turn. Wu Ming waved his hand, and the holy spear that had turned into light returned to Wu Ming's hand and turned into a solid object. It had to be said that Hercules' 12 trials, God Hand, was really powerful. It was even more cheating than Wu Ming, who cheated. It was immune to B-level damage and could resurrect 11 times. It had a strong resistance to attacks that killed it once. If the master's aptitude was high and had enough magic, the number of resurrections that were lost could be recovered. Even if Wu Ming was extremely powerful now, he couldn't be sure that he could kill Hercules and make him leave. But I don't need to kill you. I just need to defeat you, Wu Ming said as he rushed toward Hercules with his spear. Roar! Hercules saw the man in white armor running toward him and roared crazily. After all, Hercules was a demigod hero and could be said to be the most famous hero in Greece. Even if he was a berserker and had lost his mind, he had his own pride. How could Hercules be afraid of his opponent, who was also a berserker, who had unleashed his noble phantasm right from the start? He just looked a little fairer than him, had more mana, and was on par with him in terms of ability value. He just looked a little prettier than him. Roar! Hercules am not afraid. Along with the roar, Hercules jumped up and raised his axe to attack Wooming. Even if Hercules had lost most of his mind, his body's instinct was still there. His instinct allowed Hercules to hit Wooming directly. Dong! There was a small hole in the pit that was originally a big one. The small hole was filled with smoke and dust. Whoosh! A white spear came out of the smoke and swept across. Wooming swept the smoke and dust away. There was not a single speck of dust on his white armor. When Hercules was about to hit him with his sword, Wooming used his holy spear to block it. In addition to his relic, Arthur's gift armor, even without the protection of his holy spear, Wooming did not suffer any damage when Hercules hit him. To put it simply, Wooming's relic was tougher than Hercules' body from the 12 trials. Roar! Perhaps Hercules saw that his attack was ineffective. He roared again and rushed toward Wooming. When Wooming saw Hercules rushing toward him, he reached behind him and grabbed his cloak. He threw the cloak at Hercules. Hercules cut the cloak in half with his sword and axe. The cloak turned into magic particles and drifted away with the wind. Following that, the tip of the spear appeared in front of Hercules. The tip of the spear was aimed at Hercules' head. However, how could it hit Hercules, who had mind's eye? Hercules turned his head and easily dodged the attack. Roar! Following that, Hercules roared and swept his sword and axe at Wooming, who was close to him. After Wooming's attack failed, he held the end of the spear and used the holy spear as a pole. He inserted it into the ground behind Hercules. When Hercules' sword and axe swept over, he jumped and came behind Hercules. The surrounding magic instantly gathered and light appeared behind Hercules. Dong! His foot, which contained the magic of light, kicked Hercules from behind. Hercules was kicked to the bottom of the pit by silent sound. After all, both of them were now fighting on the slope of the giant pit. Wooming's kick, coupled with the influence of gravity, caused Hercules to roll toward the center of the giant pit. Wooming took back his leg that was still moving because of the kick. He stood firm and pulled out the holy spear from the ground. Wooming's kick just now had reached the A level, and it was slightly higher. Even Hercules couldn't withstand this attack. However, although he was injured, it certainly wouldn't have a big impact on the battle. Hercules inserted his sword and axe into the ground on the way to the bottom of the pit. He stopped abruptly and then turned over. Roar! Hercules was even more enraged by Wooming's humiliation of the Greek hero. At this moment, Wooming heard a voice. Phoebus' catastrophe, complain of arrows. Shoo, 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 shoo. In an instant, countless dark green arrows wrapped in strong magic power came down from the sky, and the arrow formation fell straight towards Silent Wonder. Boom, boom, boom. Wooming was buried by the arrow formation. The smoke produced by the arrow formation filled the big pit. Then a spaceship appeared in the air. As the name suggested, it was a spaceship. It was a gorgeous sailboat that flew into the sky. A green figure stood on the bow, still in the posture of drawing a bow. After seeing her noble phantasm hit Wooming, Atlantis spoke. Come back, Hercules, Atlantis said to Hercules in a steady tone that was neither commanding nor pleading. Roar! Although Hercules did not listen to the words of the Greek Holy Grail holder when he was summoned, Hercules would still listen to Atlanta a little. Immediately, Hercules jumped onto the spaceship. Then, Atlanta looked at the place where the smoke was gradually dissipating. Although Atlanta's noble phantasm was a B level for Wooming, who could even block Hercules' attack, each arrow alone could not threaten him at all. Even if Atlanta deliberately concentrated the arrows, it was estimated that it would not cause any harm to Wooming. This was indeed the case. When the smoke was completely dispersed, Wooming's spotless figure was still standing in the big pit that was almost destroyed. Such a familiar, noble phantasm. I guessed it must be you. Wu-ming said lightly. Chapter 474. Although Wu-ming's voice was not loud, Atlanta, who had a particularly good hearing, still heard it. I don't know you, Celtic hero. Atlanta held the heavenly bow blessed by Artemis and aimed at Wu-ming again. Although Atlanta kept saying that she didn't know Wu-ming, Wu-ming remembered Atlanta, and there was a reason why Atlanta didn't know Wu-ming. Servants were the avatars of heroic spirits, and each avatar was different. To put it simply, the main body was divided into many avatars, and what you know is just one of the avatars. Therefore, if you thought that you had met a servant in the Holy Grail War, you would be wrong to think that he or she knew you and befriended you when you saw him or her in other places. In the next second, he or she is likely to kill you because he or she is not the first avatar that you know. He or she may be the second avatar, the third avatar, or even the infinite avatar. Therefore, the current Atlanta was probably not the Atlanta of the 14 Horsemen, but there was another possibility. Wu-ming was now fully armed, and his face was covered. Atlanta may have said that she didn't know him because she couldn't see Wu-ming's face. In any case, even if Atlanta knew Wu-ming, the two of them among the 14 Horsemen were opponents. In addition, Wu-ming hadn't figured out the situation of a spaceship yet. Wu-ming didn't think that Atlanta could come to his side. Unfortunately, I know you. Wu-ming's slightly helpless voice came from under the armor. Wu-ming began to be vigilant. His fingers slid, and the defensive Lune rune appeared and attached to Wu-ming's armor. Atlanta's strength was quite low, but the heavenly bow blessed by moon god Artemis, when the arrow was fully drawn, the damage had reached A class, which meant that it could hurt Hercules. However, Wu-ming's armor could defend against A-class physical attacks. It stood to reason that Atlanta couldn't hurt Wu-ming. But in case there were other servants on the ship who were ready to attack Wu-ming, then the probability of Wu-ming capsizing would be high. At that moment, a disgusting voice came from the ship, as if that person was a scum. "What are you doing? Atlanta, why don't you shoot the arrow?" Although he couldn't see the person, Wu-ming could be sure that the owner of the voice was not a good person. From Atlanta's Frowns' face. With all due respect, Ison, our original plan was to retreat after retrieving Hercules. Atlanta did not put down the heavenly bow, nor did she shoot an arrow at Silent Cry. Instead, she said without looking back, Hearing this name Atlanta as people who knew a little about Greek mythology should know the story of the Argo hero ship. It was an adventure ship that gathered many Greek heroes, including Hercules and Atlanta, to search for the Golden Fleece. However, many people might not know but it was not wrong. In Greek mythology, was not very famous. It was because he was the captain and initiator of the Argo hero ship that has had a little fame. He was arrogant and domineering, proud and naive, easy to be deceived. He successfully regained the throne by relying on the power of Demetrius, whom he had swindled. After marriage, he abandoned Demetrius. As a result, Demetrius took revenge on him. In the end, because of the curse of the goddess of beauty Aphrodite, he was killed by the heavy wood that fell from the Argo hero ship. In this way, this ship must be the Argo hero ship. Hercules, Atlanta, and is on the ship were the best proof. "Tisk, you woman." Ison's angry voice rang out. Because the ship stopped above Wu-ming's head, Wu-ming could not see or anyone else on the ship. He could only see Atlanta standing on the side of the ship. Of course, even so, Wu-ming could not appreciate the scenery under Atlanta's skirt. After all, the angle was not quite right. Cough, cough. Immediately afterward, Atlanta jumped back to the ship, and the Argo hero ship immediately moved and began to drive toward the location of the Great Lakes in the north. "Want to go? Ask for my gun first," Wu-ming said as he swung his gun and was ready to release his noble phantasm again. The bottom of the Argo hero ship and Wu-ming's light gun. Which one was more powerful? Probably everyone knew that, and the servants on the Argo hero ship naturally understood this truth. As a result, countless magic circles appeared around the Argo hero ship in a composite form. And then, the magic circles began to gather energy. Judging by the concentration of magic, Wu-Ming judged that the power of these magic circles was not small. Although it was not as powerful as a noble phantasm, it was enough to cause damage to Wu-Ming. It seemed that the magician on the Argo hero ship had already begun to chant. Otherwise, there would not be so many powerful magic circles appearing in an instant. And the target of these magic circles was naturally Wu-Ming. In the blink of an eye, the mana in the magic array finished gathering and fired its silent wonder. Like a heavy downpour, countless mana pillars that could melt steel poured down from the sky. Boom! Damn! The explosion caused by the mana pillar deepened the crater even further. Then, a light gun flew out of the center of the explosion. Mythical Yggdrasil! Boom! The light gun directly hit the Argo hero ship, penetrating through the bottom of the ship and coming out from the deck, blasting a big hole in the bottom of the ship. The Argo hero ship started to smoke as if it had been shot. Then, Ison's panicked screams came from the Argo hero ship. "Ah, my ship! Quick, quick! Quick, quick, quick!" Demetrius quickly used spatial magic. Then the entire ship disappeared. Without a doubt, the Argo hero ship had been transported away by Demetrius, who Ison was talking about. Demetrius. That means these magic circles were all created by her, and those Dragonfang soldiers were probably created by her too. Wu-Ming's voice came from the center of the explosion. Gradually, the explosion dissipated, and Wu-Ming's figure was revealed in the pit that had become even deeper. His armor was still spotless. Wu-Ming waved his hand, and the holy spear returned to his hand. That spatial magic was probably set up on the Argo hero ship in advance as a precaution. After all, using spatial magic to transport such a large ship was absolutely impossible. Then, Wu-Ming sensed the reaction of the servants around him and said lightly, "Using the defensive loon magic in advance is really the right choice." After all, after Atlanta used her noble phantasm, Wu-Ming cast a defensive loon rune on himself because he was afraid that there would be more powerful attacks. Otherwise, Wu-Ming would be injured by Demetrius's magic, even with the noble phantasm Arthur's gift. If he was injured, it would be a bit difficult to deal with the new servants. Immediately, Wu-Ming looked at the edge of the giant pit, and 4 servants appeared. Chapter 475. What a spectacular scene. A fat man dressed in red and yellow said leisurely, just like an emperor, "Caesar Sama, I just received a message from the god ancestor. Caligula has left the battlefield." A woman wearing an ancient blue dress next to the fat man said, "Ah, I know, Cleopatra. Then the murderer must be this king." Caesar said, looking at Wu-Ming, "The holy white armor, the holy spear, whether it was Caesar or Cleopatra, they didn't think that the enemy was easy to deal with." The scene of Wu-Ming piercing Argo's noble phantasm was still in their minds. However, these two are not easy to deal with. As he spoke, Caesar glanced at the red-haired young arrogant king and the black-haired frivolous swordsman with his small eyes that appeared to be too fat. "Cedo, the rest of Cedo. Cedo's aura is here. Damn it, those Greek hyenas, I will never let you go." The young king roared angrily. "Well, he doesn't look easy to deal with now." Caesar smiled and waved his hand. "Oh, Celander, I didn't expect you to descend in this way. I thought Maeve would use the Holy Grail to distort you into the Mad King." The frivolous black-haired man greeted Wu-Ming, then jumped into the huge pit with his huge spiral sword. "Fergus, were you also summoned by Maeve?" Wu-Ming calmly looked at his old friend, who was killed by Gil in Winterwood City. Not to mention that he still couldn't remember what happened in Fuyuki City. Moreover, the Celtic warriors weren't people that could be held on to by trivial matters. Let's not talk about this for now. The two over there are servants from Rome, and the one on the other side is the hero of India, Rama. Let's talk about the details later. Fergus said and retreated behind Wu-Ming. Looking at the fresh wound on Fergus' chest, there was no doubt that Fergus was seriously injured. Don't look at how frivolous Fergus' words were. He was already at his limit. The wound extended from his left shoulder to his right abdomen. Although the bleeding had temporarily stopped, Fergus probably wouldn't be able to fight anymore. Then go back to Washington. You'll just be a burden if you stay here, Wu Ming said without looking back. Then I'll leave it to you. Fergus smiled and left while whistling. Wu Ming first looked at Caesar and Cleopatra before looking at the red-haired Rama. The name Rama reminded Wu Ming of the last king of the god slayers, who was also Rama. The two of them were the Rama of their respective worlds, but they would not have any connection. You're Celtic too, right? In that case, you are also responsible for what happened to Cedo. Bear it properly for me. Rama shouted furiously as he raised the undying blade in his hand. Brahmastra, indestructible Rakshasa. After activating his noble phantasm, Rama threw the undying blade at Wu Ming. Among them, the lightning and flame on the undying blade made Wu Ming nervous. According to the type, Rama's indestructible Rakshasa, with a magic noble phantasm, but that didn't mean that magic noble phantasm couldn't attack non-magic. And in terms of level, Rama's indestructible Rakshasa, 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 was an A+ noble phantasm. This made Wu Ming curse in his heart. What the F***CK? Even if Wu Ming had the noble phantasm Arthur's gift and the Lune defense rune, Wu Ming wouldn't dare to take that attack head-on. What if I hang up? Wu Ming didn't have any powerful defensive noble phantasm or defensive ability, so Wu Ming used the skill Holy King's Glory. Wu Ming crazily squeezed the magical power in his body. In an instant, endless light shone from Wu Ming's body. Even Caesar and Crowbart, who were servants, couldn't bear the light and directly raised their arms. And Rama was the same. Of course, Wu Ming didn't intend to use this skill to resist, but to use magical power to release it. The legend of the Holy King. Rama raised the Holy Lance, and with the magical power provided by Wu Ming that was equivalent to 3 noble phantasms, the Holy Lance turned into a huge light cannon. Then, Wu Ming threw it heavily. Boom! Rumble! When the indestructible blade came into contact with the light cannon, there was silence at first. Then, there was an explosion. The aftermath of the explosion was comparable to that of a nuclear bomb. Caesar, Cleopatra, and Rama were blown away. Even Fergus, who had just walked a short distance away, was affected. However, even though Fergus had walked a long distance away from the big pit, he was still affected by the explosion. It was enough to see the power of Wu Ming's noble phantasm. Fergus inserted the neon sword deep into the ground and held the hilt with difficulty to prevent it from being blown away. After about 10 seconds, the storm stopped. Well, Celander is too reckless. Even if he has a lot of magical power, he can't do whatever he wants. Although he complained, Fergus had a smile on his face. After all, the Celtics were considered a fighting race. Fergus looked at the area behind him. As if it was swallowed by the explosion, the whole big pit could no longer be seen because it was all white. Well, I'm injured. I'll let him do it himself. After that, Fergus carried his spiral sword and walked toward Washington. After a long time, the white substance dissipated and a barren plain was revealed under the sky. Why was it a plain? Because the explosion directly dug out a piece of the area. In short, it was actually a flat basin. That was the trump card of a servant, the power of a noble phantasm, which was powerful enough to change the terrain. Of course, to be able to turn the surrounding hundreds of hectares of plain into a basin was not something that could be done casually by a servant. At least, Fergus could not do it. At most, he could only scorch the land in front of him that was tens of thousands of meters long and thousands of meters wide. At that moment, a white hand suddenly stretched out from the ground of the basin. Taking a closer look, it was not a white hand. It was obviously a white gauntlet with a white gauntlet. Wu Ming climbed out of the ground. The white armor was slightly dim at the moment. Wu Ming supported his body with the Holy Lance and looked around. This Holy King's body is a bit scary. I just used 3 times more mana to supply the Noble Phantasm, plus a super strong mana release, and the explosion was so amazing. Well, ordinary servants would be drained of their mana in an instant if they did that. Only Wu Ming, who had a special ability, dared to do that. Mana amplification, EX the perfect attribute of the root dragon. No matter what class, the root dragon's mana was almost unlimited, and it was not affected by the class. Because of his almost limitless magic, coupled with his cheat code, and Maeve's use of the Holy Grail, Silent Cry has really become able to do whatever he wants. Rama, Caesar, and the others, I'm afraid they would have been blown away. Because Wu Ming was in the center of the big pit, Wu Ming was buried underground. Rama and the others, who were at the edge of the big pit, were unlikely to be buried underground. It was very likely that they would have been blown away. Forget it, let's leave it at that for the time being. The information collection is almost done. After that, Wu Ming also began to move toward Washington. Good heavens, so the reason for this nuclear flattening was to gather intelligence. Chapter 476. Logically speaking, there should be a lot of local residents around the basin that was turned from a plain to a nuclear flattened. However, the surrounding area was subconsciously identified as a battlefield by Greece and Rome. Therefore, the local residents in this area were evacuated by Greece and Rome. Both Greece and Rome set up capital cities in their respective territories and gathered the people as if they were establishing a country. The people, on the other hand, chose a side to join in order to protect themselves. It's really beyond my expectations. I thought they wouldn't care about the life and death of the local residents. Wu Ming sat in the president's seat and casually flipped through the information collected by Maeve after Wu Ming left. At this moment, Wu Ming's originally battered armor was restored to its holy state. There is no doubt that Maeve directly used a command spell to restore Wu Ming to his full state. This is not surprising. After all, both sides have similar leaders. Maeve stood behind Wu Ming and said with a smile while hugging Wu Ming's neck. Rome's words were still understandable. After all, it was Caligula and Caesar. It was normal for them to build a city. On the other hand, Greece was more than happy to play the king's game. After all, Greece had Jason. That guy used women for revenge. If he used them, then so be it. After becoming a king, marry her and live an honest life. But in the end, you abandoned her. Although both sides had leaders, neither Wu Ming nor Maeve would agree with such a man. There are also residents in our territory, right? Wu Ming continued to look at the information and said to Maeve without looking back. That's right, because Sai became the Holy King, the original plan to kill everything was cancelled. Maeve said calmly. She didn't find it strange that she said to kill everything. After Maeve occupied Washington, or rather, after occupying half of the United States, before she could do anything to the local residents, the other Holy Grail forces came and divided the United States, which was originally divided into 2 parts, into 5 parts. Maeve then retreated to Washington. After that, Maeve decided to establish her capital in Washington. She was no longer in the mood to kill. A few days later, Maeve summoned Wu Ming. After that, because of the Holy King's reputation, Mai Fu also changed her policies. She started to treat it like a country and no longer had any bad intentions. Only the Holy Grail faction that occupied the Rocky Mountains had no intention of building a city there. The Rocky Mountains were already lacking in population. As a result, a small portion of the population migrated to Greece and Rome. Of course, the westernmost force of the United States, the Lionhead, represented the United States from the very beginning. If it were not for the Rocky Mountains, the people of the American continent would have run over to the Lionhead. Now, regardless of whether they were forced or not, the natives were living in the Celtic territory. After all, as long as little Sai wants to do something, I will accompany you. If you become the wise mad king, I will become your bloody queen. I will fight alongside you. If you become the holy king, I will become your holy queen. I will rule the kingdom with you. That is my wish. I will accompany you until the day I die. Maeve's usual charm was gone. At this moment, she was really like an ordinary girl accompanying her sweetheart. She hugged Wu Ming gently. When he was summoned by the Holy Grail, Wu Ming heard Maeve's wish. Not a king who can kill with me, but a king who can make me accompany you. Wu Ming fell silent. What man would reject a girl who was willing to do anything for him? Indeed, Wu Ming's initial interest in Maeve was not because he coveted Maeve's beauty. It was because he was a greenhorn and could not help but be interested in the things around him. Wu Ming had just changed from an ordinary person to the identity of the root dragon. He had also learned from Ska. When he went out to Connaught, it was a pity that he did not see Maeve, who had played all the Celtic heroes in the palm of her hand. After all, he was young and frivolous. The reason why Maeve fell in love with Wu Ming was not only because of his heroic act of saving the damsel in distress, but also because Wu Ming ignored Maeve's charm. Maeve's beautiful body made her every move full of charm, and Wu Ming resisted Maeve's charm because of his powerful mental strength as the root dragon. Because of these two things, Maeve became interested in Wu Ming. At first, her love was indeed to play Wu Ming in the palm of her hand, but the real love was to accompany Wu Ming in the future. Wu Ming stayed by Mai Fu's side and learned about Mai Fu's past. Even if her body was full of charm, which girl was not innocent after birth? Maeve also had an unforgettable past to become like this. Whether it was pity for Maeve or indignation for Maeve's experience, Wu Ming stayed by Maeve's side and treated her as a younger sister who lacked love. Yes, Wu Ming only treated Maeve as a younger sister who needed to be doted on. The world always thought that Maeve played men in the palm of her hand, but Maeve had never received true love. Whether it was the love between family members, friends, or romantic love, Maeve had never had any of them. It had to be said that Maeve's true love for Wu Ming could be felt by Wu Ming. He was not a straight man, so why didn't Wu Ming accept it? The name of the root dragon was not an ordinary name. Ever since Wu Ming accepted his fate and left his original world to come to this moon, he knew that he would definitely not be ordinary in the future. And Square was often accompanied by danger. Before he obtained enough power to protect the people he wanted to protect, Wu Ming did not consider himself to be a burden. That's right, in the beginning, because Wu Ming did not activate the power of his bloodline, it was a little difficult for him to protect himself. Therefore, a lover was indeed a burden to Wu Ming. Wu Ming was able to leave the square world that he had lived in for more than 10 years without hesitation because he considered his own extraordinariness, because extraordinariness would also bring trouble. And now, facing such a Maeve, Wu Ming felt that he could already consider these things. Hey, Maeve, after I'm done with my business, I'll take your original body to my house. How about that? Wu Ming said in a flat tone. While speaking, Wu Ming put down the information in his hand and leaned back, closer to Maeve. It's time to make some promises. After hearing Wu Ming's words, Maeve's body suddenly trembled. Although Wu Ming was wearing armor, Wu Ming could still feel the change in Maeve. Well, I'll wait for that day. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait for you on the seat of heroes, waiting for you to pick me up. Maeve hugged Wu Ming's arm tightly and said with a happy face. The sun shone in from the window, shining on the pure white couple and blessing them. Chapter 477. Although it was heartwarming, Wu Ming did not want to reveal his innocence here. Then, the two of them began to discuss Rama, who hated the Celts, and Fergus, who was injured. So, you think Cedo is useful? So you asked Fergus to go to Alcatraz Island to transport Cedo, who's been captured a long time ago. In the end, Rama and the Argo who were following Rama were attracted? Wu Ming said calmly. As everyone knew, the American continent was huge, so was the United States. Therefore, the territories were not as strictly divided as Wu Ming had seen from the map. For example, the mountainous plains between the Rocky Mountains and the Great Lakes were unoccupied. The Celts were in the easternmost area, while the Greeks and Romans were in the western plains not far from the Appalachian Mountains. The Holy Grail forces in the Rocky Mountains did not make any moves at all. As for the Lionhead forces, they were temporarily resting in the westernmost area as they could not defeat the other forces. The Missouri River flowed through that area, and the terrain was not too high. The Green Holy Grail forces were mainly in the southern part of the Rocky Mountains. Therefore, that area was the largest unoccupied land. Many of the native residents had formed a rebel army. It was said that they were led by a single follower. That was why they could be active in this continent. If the territories were as strictly divided as Wu Ming had seen on a map, how could there be a rebel army? They would have been suppressed by these forces long ago. All in all, the westernmost Alcatraz island belonged to the easternmost Celts. There was nothing wrong with that. Ahem, let's not talk about that for now. According to Maeve, she was preparing to withdraw Beowulf, who was stationed in Alcatraz Island. Therefore, she sent Fergus to meet him. In the end, because Rama had a special skill that allowed him to sense Cedo, Rama intercepted Beowulf and Fergus halfway. For the sake of his beloved woman, the hero Rama sneaked up on Beowulf and threw out a noble relic. He almost killed Beowulf and severely injured him. Fortunately, Cedo was escorted by Wu Ming's soldiers at the back. Otherwise, Rama's noble relic could have killed Cedo. However, if Cedo was beside Beowulf and Fergus, Rama would not be able to throw out his noble artifact. Afterward, when Fergus and Roma were fighting, Cedo was taken away by the crew of the Argo led by Aeson. They also killed Beowulf while they were at it. Atlanta was more than enough to deal with a heavily injured Beowulf, not to mention that there was also the god-magician Demetrius. Then, Rama, who was enraged once again, used his spiritual base and used another relic to injure Fergus. He then began to chase after Argo. Although it was called an injury, Fergus was almost done for. Rama had overdrawn his spiritual base to release the relic. Perhaps, when Rama was fighting Wu Ming, he had also overdrawn his spiritual base to use the relic. As a lone servant, although Rama was summoned by the Holy Grail could only maintain Rama's current realm. It was impossible for it to provide unlimited mana. Almost all the other servants were the same. It seemed that only Wu Ming had a master, and that was Maeve. He couldn't see the command seal because Maeve was wearing a white silk glove that blocked the command seal. After that, Fergus needed to return to Washington, so he followed Rama on the way. When they passed through Rome's sphere of influence, Caesar and Cleopatra, who attracted attention, appeared. The two of them watched Rama chase after the Argo, and Fergus chased Rama. With the mentality of watching a good show and supporting Caligula, the two of them followed. As a result, the scene when Wu Ming saw the four servants gathered in the big pit appeared. However, unfortunately, Caligula had already been killed by Wu Ming, and the good show that they wanted to watch had turned into a bad one. If that's the case, Rama should be dying now. At present, they only knew that Rama had overdrawn his mana and spiritual base to release his noble artifact twice. Before that, they couldn't deny whether Rama had overdrawn his mana or not. Coupled with the constant running in this huge American continent, he had consumed a lot of mana. Not to mention, my noble artifact and Rama's noble artifact exploded. The explosion wasn't far from Rama, so he must have been affected. Wu Ming was only affected by the explosion, but the armor on his body was dimmed, and he still needed Maeve to use a command seal to restore it. Rama, who had no armor, overdrawn his mana, and unstable spiritual base, was even worse. Maybe he has already left. If that's the case, my plan to unify the continent will be one step closer. After all, if Wu Ming wanted to unify the American continent, Wu Ming, who had become enemies with Rama, would definitely be troubled by Rama, the great hero of India. Wu Ming's people had kidnapped Rama's wife. Now that Wu Ming had accepted the identity of the Celtic king, he had to shoulder this responsibility. Yeah, the hatred of stealing my wife is irreconcilable. I have to unify the continent as soon as possible, Wu Ming said in a serious tone. Wu Ming and Maeve had already planned it out. Wu Ming's goal was to restore the singularity, so he had to collect the Holy Grail of the singularity. There were a total of 4 Holy Grails: the Celtic king, the Greek king, the Roman king, and the Holy Grail king who was still unknown. Wu Ming, who was the Celtic king, could be said to have one less enemy. After all, Maeve, who had the Holy Grail, was one of his people. Therefore, he had to deal with the other forces. Of course, Lionhead's native force in the United States did not have the Holy Grail, so he did not have to categorize it as an enemy for the time being. Therefore, Wu Ming set a small goal for himself, which was to unify the United States collect the Holy Grail, and complete the restoration of humanity. However, Lionhead can also work with him. After all, both of them have the same goal, Wuming analyzed. Lionhead's goal must be to restore the United States, and Wuming's goal was to collect the Holy Grail, so he needed to unify the country. In that case, the two sides could work together. But before the other three forces came to this singularity, we and Lionhead were mortal enemies. I'm afraid it's not that easy to bury the hatchet. Maeve said, "That's right, mortal enemies would not easily unite just because of an additional enemy. It was not that easy." "That's true," Wuming said in a deep voice. Then, Wuming thought of Gadatsi. I don't know if Tachika and the others came to this singularity. If they had the help of Chaldea's master, it would be a great help to collect the Holy Grail. After all, the reason why those followers were alone was because they were summoned by the Holy Grail. They helped Chaldea's master to take back the source of the singularity. After all, the singularity was caused by the followers with their own private wishes, so it was impossible to talk about it. By the way, in Celtic, besides you, me, Fergus, and Beowulf, are there any other followers? Wuming suddenly said to Maeve. Chapter 478. The reason why Wuming asked this question was because Wuming had never seen other Celtic servants. If he didn't meet Fergus, he wouldn't know that Fergus was on his side. There are three more, but one of them is not from Celtic, but from India, and he has a little relationship with Romo. Maeve pretended to be mysterious and said to Wuming with a playful smile, "If there is a chance, introduce them to me." Wuming chuckled and said lightly. Wuming's meaning was obvious. He was going out again. "Are you going out again? Really? Can't you spend more time with me?" Maeve said coquettishly. Her body began to produce charm again. Maeve naturally knew that charm was ineffective on Wuming, but it was her body's natural ability, and it was released involuntarily. Then, Wuming touched Maeve's head with his hand that was wearing white protective gear. "Although I have become a king, after all, I have no interest in it, so I will leave it to you, my queen." After touching Maeve's head, Wuming asked some information about his servants and Lionhead's information and left the room. "My king, I will help you take care of our country." Maeve, who had once again turned into an infatuated woman, was left alone in the room. Wuming was ready to go to the United States, which was the westernmost part of the American continent. Now that he couldn't find Gadatsi for the time being, Wuming was ready to go to the countries that could be united. He just wanted to meet the old friend that he heard from Maeve. "I just don't know if he remembers me," Wuming said casually. When he walked to the corner, Wuming met two people. Well, the person in front of Wuming was obviously a master and servant, and the two showed a very obvious superior and subordinate relationship. The former was a handsome man with long blonde hair, and the latter was a young man with short black hair and a mole. What a coincidence to meet the Holy King. The blonde man's tone was not too respectful, but also not arrogant, as if he was in front of a person who deserved a little respect. "I am Finn McCool. This is my subordinate," the blonde man introduced to Wuming. "Nice to meet you, Your Highness Holy King. I am Dilmund O'Dina," the black-haired man behind Finn said respectfully to Wuming. It seemed that Finn and Dilmund were two of the three remaining servants of the Celtic side. After all, Maeve had said that one of them was from India, but the two in front of Wuming were from Ireland. "You don't have to be so courteous to me. If I remember correctly, you guys are from the Fjordna Knights. Speaking of which, you guys have some history with Fergus." Wuming nodded knowingly. Finn smiled calmly when he heard that. "The necessary etiquette is still necessary. You are the Connaught Silver Dragon Cylinder who defeated Fergus. Even Cuchulainn didn't beat you. Naturally, you need to be respectful to a hero." Dilmund shook his head with a smile. Wuming had some recollection of what Dilmund said. When Connaught and Ulster went to war, Fergus ran over to serve Maeve. Because he couldn't stand Fergus's lecherous eyes, Wuming chased him away. At that time, Maeve even laughed at Wuming, saying something like, "Since you were jealous, then just accept me." Ahem, Wuming was just a siscon. How could he let his cabbage stay with a wild boar? Now that he thought about it, it seemed that Wuming was quite a siscon. He watched Artoria grow up, and Joan of Arc was younger than him in his memory. There were also Illyria, Mayu, and Shobi. They all seemed to be Siscons or Siscons. How could it be? It was just a coincidence. Wooming shook his head subconsciously, but this scene was humble in the eyes of Finn and Dilmund. You don't have to be humble. Your achievements on the battlefield between Greece and Rome are still vivid in our minds. At that time, Finn and Dilmund were not in Washington. The two of them were outside roping in stragglers. Of course, they basically did not gain anything. They only met a few low-level servants, and because they did not obey, they were all killed. Again, the American continent was very big. At that time, the two of them did not meet Fergus or Wooming. Then, near the battlefield, they saw the nuclear explosion caused by Wooming's noble phantasm. Wooming did not say anything more, and then asked the two of them, "You two, are you going to ask May for instructions now? You don't have to do anything, just defend our camp steadily." Immediately, Wooming gave instructions. The situation was not completely clear, and the third party of the Holy Grail force was not clear either. Doing nothing was the best way at the moment. Although Wooming said so, Finn was still a little hesitant. Maeve did give orders after Wooming arrived, and Wooming's words were the final word. However, no matter what, Wooming had only been here for less than 2 days. It was the same principle as the Empress Dowager and the Emperor. Just listen to Xiao Sai. At that moment, Maeve's voice came from behind Wooming. After all, Maeve was also a very active person, and it was unlikely that she would sit in the office for a long time. In addition, Wooming, Finn, and Dilmund had been arguing for a long time, so it was normal for Maeve to catch up. Didn't I say that Xiao Sai's words are the highest order? You may leave, Maeve said casually to Finn and Dilmund. Understood. Let's go, Dilmund. Finn nodded and waved at Dilmund. Yes. Dilmund responded and followed Finn out of the place. At that moment, Wooming's heart was in turmoil. Sure enough, the servants are not obedient. Whether it was from Finn's attitude or the conversation with Wooming, it could be seen that he did not put himself in the position of a subject. He was just obeying Maeve's orders. Wooming believed that if it were not for the Holy Grail, Finn and Dilmund would probably have left here and set up their own house. After all, they were summoned by Maeve with the Holy Grail, and Maeve also had a slight suppressive power over them. Is it okay? Wooming asked, Maeve with concern. Maeve naturally knew what Wooming was talking about. At least they are very obedient. After all, heroes are always eccentric guys. However, if Xiao Sai hates them, just get rid of them. Holding Wooming's hand, Maeve said charmingly, That's not necessary. It's better than nothing. Wooming shook his head. Then Wooming felt that something was wrong. Why do I feel like I've become a big boss? Sai. Listen to Xiao Sai. Chapter 479. Night, Missouri River Basin. A person wearing a black robe and a black hood, whose face couldn't be seen clearly, was quietly running along the Missouri River. The figure sometimes changed his route, sometimes he hid, and sometimes he came to the Black Mountain in the western part of the Missouri River Basin. This silhouette arrived in a dense forest near Black Mountain and stopped. The figure took off his hood, revealing a black-haired, golden-eyed face. The person who came was naturally Wooming, who was preparing to go to the western part of the Rocky Mountains to investigate and cooperate with Lionhead. It had to be said that there were many plains in the United States, but there weren't many forests, but they weren't few either. Wooming sometimes changed his route. Sometimes he hid, and sometimes he didn't want to be discovered by the servants and humans in this area. At night, the people in the American continent were active, whether they were servants or humans. And this Missouri River Basin was a place that was not occupied by the Holy Grail forces. In this way, whether it was the followers, the native residents, or the rebels, they were like fish in water in this place. The unknown Holy Grail forces in the Rocky Mountains did not move, and Greece and Rome were fighting fiercely. Lionhead and Maeve were in the westernmost and easternmost part of the continent. In this way, no one had time to care about this place. Naturally, it became a place where many followers and a large number of human residents resisted. And this place, in Wooming's view, could be said to be the safest passage from the east to the west. Like a lone assassin, Wooming quietly came here. By the way, the meaning of being alone was not only superficial, but it also had another meaning. A lone follower actually referred to a follower that was not a force. After all, not all non-force followers were really alone like Wu Ming. On this continent, it was originally the native forces of the United States that fought against the United Kingdom and succeeded in independence. But now it was divided into 5 parts. In addition to the followers who held the Holy Grail and the forces summoned by the native forces of the United States, the Holy Grail also summoned extra followers. Due to the large number of Holy Grails with this singularity, there were many followers who were left behind. Apart from Finn and Dilmod killing a few unranked servants, Fergus also encountered many lone servants on his way to Alcatraz Island. Fergus, no, it should be the Celtic followers, were all warlike. Fergus had basically been fighting along the way. This was also one of the reasons why Fergus had been so easily beaten down by Rama. After all, Rama had also overdrawn his spirit base. With so many factors added together, Fergus had been unable to block him. On the other hand, Beowulf was completely unlucky. Not only did the despicable Rama launch a sneak attack on him, but he was also ambushed by the Greek team. Wu Ming did not even see him and left the stage immediately. Except for some servants with special abilities or noble phantoms, or a few servants that Fergus didn't kill, the rest of the servants were killed by Fergus. Even so, there were still a lot of lone followers who were active on this continent. At this moment, Wu Ming had become a lone assassin. It was reasonable to say that because of Maeve's wish and Wu Ming's cheating, the spirit base could not be changed. Moreover, because of the identity of the Holy Ruler, Wu Ming was like a big light bulb in the dark night, unable to hide the arrival of the Holy Ruler. But this can't stop Wu Ming from being a cheater, Although the authority and the blade of salvation were not brought into this body because of the Serland spirit base, Wu Ming had brought his own dimensional noble phantasm, Dragonus Dragon's Nest. In the beginning, Wu Ming only wanted to use the dimensional Lune Rune to store things in a small space. Now, the Dragon's Nest could be said to have been reborn. Not only was it nourished by Wu Ming's magic every day, but it was also soaked in the origin of the moon for a long time. Then, it was soaked in Wu Ming's home, the origin of the moon, for a long time. One had to know that this dimensional Lune Rune was engraved on Wu Ming's body. In other words, in the origin, Wu Ming's dimensional noble phantasm was equivalent to being strengthened all the time. Moreover, it was a qualitative strengthening. Now, the space inside the dragon's nest had become almost infinite. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a small world. Although it was still used by Wu Ming to store things, however, it was just as well. Wu Ming was a collecting maniac. Everything that caught his eye was kept in the dragon's nest. Putting aside the things that he collected in Kanzaki, Wu Ming had also been through several worlds and secretly stored a lot of things. If one had to say, Wu Ming's dragon's nest could be regarded as a different kind of gate of Babylon. For example, there were many items that could shield one's magic and aura. Since he was going to be an assassin, the first thing he needed to do was hide. Wu Ming took out a dim gem from his bosom. It was a tool used for assassination. It could shield one's aura, but it was no longer effective. This thing seems to be from the Yggdrasil world tree. It's surprisingly useful. Forget it, who cares? Wu Ming casually crushed the dim gem. With a thought, the space fluctuated and golden ripples appeared. Then, Wu Ming took out a metal ball from the golden ripples. It was the metal ball that Shiobi had fused with half of her core. I kind of missed that little girl. Wu Ming was naturally referring to his younger sister, Shiobi. In Wu Ming's opinion, Shiobi, who had just obtained human emotions, was like a child. Although her brain was more genius than a genius, Shiobi was a parsing machine after all. Then, Wu Ming pressed the metal ball against his body without hesitation. In an instant, the metal ball seemed to have turned into liquid and integrated into Wu Ming's clothes. At that moment, Wu Ming had already taken off his armor and put on the clothes from the other world with the Divine Soul Seed. This was the first time Wu Ming had taken off his armor in this singularity. He was inexplicably excited. Cough, cough. Is this the formation of an inner armor? Wu Ming could clearly feel that there was a layer of metal armor covering his assassin-style clothes. However, it was not completely covered. Wu Ming could feel it. Now that I think about it, the Kakai race is really a cheating race. In various senses, as he said that, a metal mask appeared on Wu Ming's face. Only the area where the eyes were was left with a rectangular gap with a rectangular black lens. Then, several particularly strange, small magic circles unfolded around Wu Ming, setting off a small gust of wind. In an instant, the wind stopped and the magic circles disappeared. That's it. Chapter 480. After all, the forest elves. No, it should be said that in their world, everyone's magic looked gaudy. Why did it not work in Wu Ming's hands? Forget it, as long as it works. Through the data on the black lens, Wu Ming could check his own status. Although the lens looked black from the outside, Wu Ming saw it as transparent. Not only that, the night was now like day in Wu Ming's eyes. At that moment, the lens display showed a map of Wu Ming's surroundings. On the map, places with energy were blue, and places without energy were white. After all, the Kakai elves did not use magic. So no matter what kind of unknown energy it was, as long as it was energy, it would be marked. Magic was blue. Looking at his white body, Wu Ming was a little confused. Others in this world shouldn't be able to see the forest elves' magic, right? That's right. Wu Ming used the Kakai elves' characteristics to cast the forest elves' magic that was copied into the metal ball. Giliel had gotten Wu Ming many books about forest elves' magic. Wu Ming did not ask where they came from and stored those magic in the core and the root, because there was no need to learn it anymore, just like Wu Ming's nameless spellbook. Although Wu Ming used to flip through it often, he realized that it was faster to use the spellbook automatically than to cast it himself. So Wu Ming gave up. Ahem, back to the main topic. Although it was reasonable to say that the Kakai elves could only copy an attack that had been seen or damaged once, when he was in the root, Wu Ming had slightly modified the core, making the core sublimate from its original foundation. In short, it would not have any bad effects on Shiobi. So, am I back to my old profession? Although Wu Ming was not strong when he was an assassin, Wu Ming quite liked it. After moving his body, Wu Ming felt incomparably comfortable. After all, it was still comfortable in the state where his aura was blocked. No matter how sneaky he was, it was as if he was in the open. At this moment, Wu Ming discovered that there were energy bodies approaching from the surroundings. Servant? He doesn't look like a passerby. With that thought in mind, Wu Ming activated the camouflage function and disappeared. Just as Wu Ming hid himself, a man with dark brown skin, half-naked upper body, and a small knife in his hand arrived. After vigilantly observing the surrounding situation and inspecting the place, the man quickly left. Servants that were attracted by the whirlwind just now. Wu Ming revealed himself and muttered to himself. Wu Ming could tell that the other party was a servant by the speed of a Class B when he left. What's more, the other party's body was also filled with a lot of magical power. Wu Ming could see clearly through the lens that the magic power in the other party's body was slightly dark blue. At the very least, the other party's magic attribute should be a Class B. It's rare that he is a caster. Wu Ming thought. It seems that I have to be careful. When he activated the core, Wu Ming caused a small whirlwind. A whirlwind appeared in the woods at night, which naturally attracted the other party's attention. As a caster, Wu Ming's assassin at the moment was not a good match. Assassins in the dark were most afraid of those fancy magicians. The other party should not have found me. After all, who knows what magic caster will use? If the other party's magic is quite powerful, then Wu Ming will be exposed. Later, Wu Ming looked at the place where the other party checked. Sure enough, there were some mysterious inscriptions that Wu Ming did not know. Is it a curse on this continent? Wu Ming pondered and activated the scanning device in the core of Jikai Seed. Immediately, the result appeared on the lens in front of Wu Ming's eyes. Sure enough, that guy turned out to be a caster magician. Looking at him, sneakily holding a knife, anyone who saw him would think that he was an assassin. If it weren't for the scanning information provided by the lens, Wu Ming wouldn't have seen that there was a lot of magical power in the other party's body. If the servants were close to each other, They could perceive each other, but they couldn't perceive how much magical power the other party had unless the other party continued to release magical power. Just like Wu Ming's skill Holy King's Glory, Wu Ming used magical power to release magical power. In the eyes of others, it was an incomparably huge source of magical power. Often, the existence of powerful magical power was not something to be trifled with. To put it simply, it was like tigers and lions roaring in nature to tell others that they were not to be trifled with. According to the scanning results, these inscriptions played a role in detection. As long as someone passed by this place, it would be triggered. Fortunately, although Wu Ming was present, the shielding magic of the forest elves had been working. I don't care. Destroying these inscriptions will arouse the other party's suspicion. After that, Wu Ming continued to move toward the west. On the way, Wu Ming also saved the map of the American continent in the core, and a virtual live map appeared in front of Wu Ming. Wu Ming looked at the map. There is a town called Riverton at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. After Riverton, we will reach the Rocky Mountains. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming put away the virtual map, pulled his collar, and continued to move forward. Almost a few minutes later, Wu Ming came to a place some distance away from Riverton. Looking at the sparsely lit small town in front of him, Wu Ming paused. He felt the presence of servants in the town in front of him, but the specific number was unknown. Immediately afterward, he activated the scanning function of the armor again. Sure enough, Wu Ming found a clue. Anti-detection and defense magic. Wu Ming found through the scan that there was a lot of magic around the town, and it looked like a Greek-style magic. After all, Wu Ming had a lot of dealings with Greek servants, so he could still see it. However, the anti-detection magic doesn't work on the scanning of the Kikai. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming activated the long-range scan to detect the number of servants on the opposite side. Although the Kikai was called a magical creature, they were more like high-tech machines. Wu Ming's scan was completely like an infrared scanner. Because the other party didn't set up a visual obstruction magic, Wu Ming's scan was easily successful. Just like Assassin, Jack the Ripper's information erased, it didn't work on the camera. So, long live science greater than over equal to. Later, through the scan, Wu Ming learned the number of servants in that town. Wu Ming, who knew the result, was really shocked if Ji Kai's scan was not wrong. There are more than 10 servants. Wu Ming was a little surprised. Through the lens, Wu Ming knew that there were more than 10 servants, which really shocked Wu Ming. What are these servants doing here? What's the big plan? Wu Ming's heart was filled with doubts. At that moment, an invisible arrow shot at Wu Ming. Chapter 481. Wu Ming heard the sound of air friction and leaned back, dodging the arrow that was shot at him. To be honest, if it wasn't for the warrior's insight, Wu Ming wouldn't have noticed the arrow. Looking at the ancient wooden arrow that was deeply embedded in the ground, Wu Ming found that it was entangled with magic such as silence, acceleration, and stealth, although these magic had been ineffective. No wonder he couldn't hear anything and couldn't see anything. It seemed that the opponent's magic was not low. At this moment, the lens in front of Wu Ming's eyes also showed the arrow attack. There was no doubt that the arrow that was just enchanted with many magic had escaped the scanning of the Kikai core. It seemed that he couldn't rely too much on things from another world. In any case, it was really inconvenient to use things that were not from his world. I've been discovered. By now, if Wu Ming still didn't know that he had been discovered, then he really lived in vain. Since he was discovered, Wu Ming simply didn't hide. Feeling that there was a servant running toward him, Wu Ming didn't escape, but stood up. The inner armor that was transformed by the Kikai core was still worn by Wu Ming. Then, magic emerged from Wu Ming's body, and the magic began to burn. The white flame covered Wu Ming's whole body. Then, Wu Ming raised one of his hands and waved. The white flame disappeared with the wave of his hand, and Wu Ming appeared in the air. He had already put on the white full-body armor, Arthur's gift armor. He muttered the name of the relic softly. The holy armor seemed to be responding to him as it flashed with white light. At that time, the attacking servant also arrived. It looked like, no, he was a berserker. Aha! Ah ha ha ha. Oppressor. You are the oppressor. Ah ha ha. The person who came was Spartacus, the red team berserker in the 14 Horsemen War. Because Wu Ming was in the red team at that time, so the two were regarded as allies. But Spartacus probably couldn't remember it. And the oppressor that Spartacus was talking about was probably Wu Ming's current identity as the king. This guy was quite obsessed with leaders, and he was even more obsessed with tyrants. But in general, he was still a berserker that could be communicated with. Of course, this was for the master. In this way, Spartacus, who had met Wu Ming once, jumped up, raised his ordinary iron sword, and slashed at Wu Ming. Clank! Wu Ming raised his arm and blocked Spartacus' iron sword. Arthur's armor of gift, which had a grade A defense against physical damage, was more than enough to block Spartacus's iron sword. Bang! Immediately after, with the sound of steel colliding, Wu Ming used his hand to block Spartacus's iron sword and pushed him away. Spartacus took a few steps back, stopped, and laughed excitedly. Ah ha ha ha! Ah ha ha ha! Oppressor! Give me even more pressure. Like a fanatic, Spartacus once again rushed to Wu Ming with his sword. To be honest, Wu Ming didn't want to fight with this guy. Spartacus's strength was grade A, and his durability was the highest grade, EX. In short, this guy couldn't be killed. However, in addition to that, Spartacus could also convert the damage he received into mana and store it in his own body to activate his healing beast's roar. In the Battle of 14 Nights, although Wu Ming was not present, through chatting with Joan of Arc, Wu Ming learned that she used her noble phantasm to resist Spartacus' noble phantasm. After all, it was a grade A noble phantasm, and it was supplemented by a large amount of magic. Although Wu Ming's armor could block a grade of physical attack, in the face of a grade A super explosion, he would be defeated if he was not careful. Because of this, Wu Ming didn't want to be entangled with Spartacus. It just so happened that Spartacus' ability, except for strength and durability, did not exceed grade C, and his agility was only grade D. In other words, there was no need for Wu Ming to clash head-on with his opponent. Of course, Wu Ming's strength had reached grade A, and he had the support of Lun's magic and mech armor. He was not afraid of a head-on clash. Sure enough, it's better to fight quickly. After all, since Spartacus was here, it meant that the other 10 servants Wu Ming observed were also here, although Wu Ming was not weak. After all, it was unlikely that more than 10 servants were first-class or even top-level servants. If that was the case, Wu Ming had to consider running away. Oppressor? Aha! Looking at Spartacus, who rushed in front of him again, Wu Ming decided to end the battle immediately. Clank! The sound of steel colliding was heard again, but this time, Wu Ming did not block Spartacus' iron sword with his arm, but he firmly grasped Spartacus' iron sword with his palm. Ah ha ha! Oppressor! Spartacus struggled to pull back his weapon, but it did not move. At this moment, Wu Ming's hand that was holding Spartacus' iron sword was full of Lun's runes and electrical wiring. That was the Lun's magic that strengthened his strength and the mechanical armor's enhancement. The double enhancement allowed Silent Wonder's strength to temporarily surpass a rank. It was not correct to say that he was EX rank, but rather his strength had become A++. After all, it was temporary. However, the data was nothing to worry about. Wu Ming's purpose was only to control Spartacus for a few seconds. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming's free hand was inserted straight into the space, and a golden ripple wrapped around Wu Ming's hand. Then, Wu Ming's hand was pulled out of the golden ripple, and a silver-white chain was pulled out by Wu Ming from the golden ripple. That's right, that was the pseudo-heaven lock that Wu Ming once created with Create Green item. Clatter! With the sound of the chain, Wu Ming threw the silver chain on Spartacus' body. Like a silver python, the silver chain tightly wrapped around Spartacus' limbs and body after coming into contact with him. Then, Wu Ming let go of Spartacus' iron sword. Clang! The iron sword fell to the ground. Although the pseudo-heaven lock also had a special attack on divinity, Spartacus did not have divinity, so the chain was just a solid chain that was difficult for Spartacus to break free. However, If one looked carefully, they would find that there were lune runes on the silver chain. Fearing that Spartacus would break free from the chain, Wu Ming instantly added lune runes to the pseudo-heaven lock after taking out the pseudo-heaven lock. As a result, Spartacus, who was bound by the strengthened pseudo-heaven lock, was strangled to death. Of course, Spartacus, who could not use his strength, naturally let go of the iron sword and let it fall to the ground. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming reached into the golden ripple and took out 2 chains. Of course, this time, it was not to deal with Spartacus, but to deal with the new servant. Create green item, advanced item creation. As Wu Ming's words fell, 2 holy swords were inserted into the ground. Chapter 482. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming wrapped the 2 pseudo-heavenly chains around his hands. After that, Wu Ming grabbed the 2 long swords on the ground. These 2 swords were almost exactly the same as Wu Ming's blade of salvation. To be precise, they were exactly the same as Artoria's Excalibur. These 2 swords were imitations created by Wu Ming using Create Green item. For the pseudo-Excalibur, although it could still release light cannons, its power and range were not only 1 level lower, but several levels lower. Of course, the sharpness of these 2 pseudo-holy swords was also greatly reduced. The reason why Wu Ming used Create Green item to create these 2 pseudo-holy swords was to use them as consumables. Through the scanning device on the mecha armor, coupled with the fact that the other party did not cover up, Wu Ming easily saw the servant coming from behind him. It's them. Wu Ming sighed. What an ill-fated relationship. He shook his head. With their speed, they could indeed get behind him, and by doing this, they must not let him escape. Wu Ming smiled helplessly. I didn't expect them to be summoned as well. They can be considered old rivals. The one who strikes first gains the advantage. I won't hold back then. Wu Ming smiled. With that said, Wu Ming wrapped the chains on his arms around the hilts of the 2 holy swords. Immediately, he threw the pseudo-holy swords. Excalibur! On the opposite side, the green-haired young man held a long spear and ran toward Wu Ming at a very fast speed. Although he was a rider, he had a permanent noble phantasm, so he did not need his own ride. Although this would expose his weakness, there were not many people who could catch up with his speed. You little thief who dares to spy on me, obediently accept your death. Then, listening to his disciples' bold words, his teacher, who had transformed into a centaur, chased after him. Don't underestimate the enemy. Achilles, the enemy is still in the same place. Achilles seemed a little impatient as he listened to teacher Ma's earnest teachings and diligent exhortations. However, he still nodded to show that he understood. Yes, I know, Master Sharon. Although this disciple of his looked arrogant and unruly, he still gave him face as his teacher. Just as Achilles thought, there were almost no servants who could catch up with him. Even his teacher, Sharon, could not. Even if his teacher hadn't told him not to underestimate the enemy, Achilles would have slowed down. Otherwise, if Achilles were to run at full speed, even if he was in his centaur form and running on 4 legs, he would not be able to catch up with Achilles, let alone talk to him. At that moment, a voice came into their ears. Excalibur? What? Sharon secretly frowned. Thought in his heart, this was a little troublesome. Hearing this sentence, Sharon was shocked. Not to mention that it was a liberation noble phantasm. The holy sword Excalibur was quite famous. He tried to see the enemy's figure to determine whether the enemy was King Arthur or not. But even with his clairvoyance, the enemy was deep in the forest, so Sharon could not see the enemy's appearance. In addition, not only Sharon, but Achilles also knew about the legend of King Arthur and the holy sword. After all, King Arthur was too famous, especially in Europe. Although Sharon and Achilles both knew about the holy sword, the 2 of them had different reactions. Is the enemy King Arthur? Unlike Charon's frown, Achilles' first reaction after hearing the word liberation was excitement. For Achilles, who was asked to choose to die as an ordinary person or die on the battlefield, chose the latter. A powerful enemy was his motivation. However, even so, Achilles wasn't a hothead. Although he did not know why King Arthur would release his noble phantasm, he had seen the power of the holy sword before, from the Battle of the 14 Knights that he retained his memory of. Although he was also very puzzled as to why he retained his memory of that battle, since Sharon also retained it, he would leave the brainstorming to his teacher. Just as Achilles was about to take out his noble phantasm to surround the small world of the heavens, Achilles' cosmos. For defense, Achilles was stunned on the spot. It wasn't just Achilles. Even Sharon was stunned. This was because they saw two small light pillars less than 5 meters in diameter shooting towards them at a speed that was not considered fast. Of course, this was for the two of them who had grade A+ agility. If it were Spartacus, he would definitely be hit. Moreover, why were there two light pillars? Wasn't there only one holy sword Excalibur? What really confused Sharon and Achilles was not this, but the scale of the noble phantasm. Although they had never seen the holy sword Excalibur's noble phantasm, they had seen another holy sword's noble phantasm before. How could the scale be so different? In any case, Achilles and Sharon were completely confused right now. With such a scale, they did not even need to defend, they only needed to dodge. By the way, the two of them would not directly charge towards Wooming, but chose to attack from the side. Although the light pillars were less than 5 meters in diameter, if it affected Riverton, who had a master, it would be quite troublesome. That was why the two of them went to the back. Of course, not letting the strange King Arthur escape was also one of the reasons. In just a flash, Achilles dodged the attack range of the two light pillars that were less than 10 meters in diameter side by side. For servants, especially those who had grade A+ agility, a distance of 100 meters only needed a breath of time, and a fierce jump was enough. Then the two of them witnessed the small light pillars explode from their sides. Feeling the scorching heat, the two of them had no choice but to be serious. Even if it was a fake Excalibur, it was still a holy sword, and it was also a trump card noble phantasm. Of course, it was hard to say if it hit Sharon, but even if it hit Achilles, it would not take his life. At most, it would only injure him. At this moment, Charon's eyes flickered, and he hurriedly called out to Achilles. Achilles, quickly retreat. Charon's clairvoyant skill combined with mind's eye, true, to achieve a short period of future vision. Through this, he saw chains appear in the light pillars that were less than 5 meters long. Although he relied on future vision and mind's eye to avoid being tied up by the chains, Sharon saw Achilles being tied up by the chains. Hearing his teacher's words, Achilles naturally prepared to retreat. But Wooming seemed to have heard Charon's words, and the chains instantly appeared from the light pillars and shot towards Sharon and Achilles. Walala. Chapter 483. Whoosh. Using his wooden bow to shoot an arrow, Sharon broke the chain that was heading straight for him and quickly retreated on all fours. Then, Sharon looked in Achilles' direction. Without a doubt, Achilles was tied up. His spear fell to the ground, and his arms and body were tied up by the silver chain like firewood. In the end, Achilles had underestimated his opponent. However, this was also due to his competitive nature. Unlike Sharon, who had moved more than 10 meters, Achilles had only dodged to the side of the light pillar. It could be said that he had almost brushed against it to show off his ability. In the end, the chain covered by the light pillar had tied him up in an instant. This really was a case of if you don't do it, you won't die. I see. The target wasn't me from the beginning. Sharon saw the light pillar disappear, and the chain slowly retracted. Perhaps it was not meant to tie him up in the first place. Realization dawned on him. Ugh, damn it. Why can't I break free from the chain? Achilles said angrily. At this moment, Achilles was already using all his strength. He grimaced, but he could not break free from the silver chain. Instead, the chain was getting tighter and tighter. Sharon, on the other hand, did not care about his disciple. Instead, he raised his wooden bow and pointed in the direction of the forest. It wasn't just him. Even Achilles could feel that the owner of the chain was getting closer. So it seems that Spartacus has failed? Sharon said calmly. Of course, it was not Sharon who had asked Wooming to scout. Spartacus happened to be the closest to Wooming, so when he heard that there was an enemy, he ran over excitedly. Stop, Achilles. The chain is getting tighter the more you struggle, Sharon said to Achilles without turning his head. Achilles also realized that he could not break free no matter how hard he tried. He simply listened to Sharon and stopped struggling and looked at the forest together. Seeing that the chain that did not bind Sharon was slowly being dragged into the forest, they guessed that the enemy was about to reach the edge of the forest. That's a chain that targets divinity. After all, an immortal demigod hero isn't easy to deal with. Wuming's voice came from the forest. This voice is... Karen frowned again. He had sensed something when he heard the word Excalibur. Furthermore, it was rumored that Sodric had obtained the inheritance of the Knight of the Round Table, Villotharanst. It was not impossible for him to have a weakened version of the Holy Sword. Therefore, Ka Rong estimated that he was close to the mark. Of course, Achilles, who was in a state of rage, did not pay much attention to Wuming's words. His face was full of resentment. You despicable person, if you have the ability, let go of me and fight me head on. What kind of hero are you if you play tricks? Then, wearing a holy white armor, a silver white chain wrapped around his right hand, and a silver white chain still wrapped around his left hand. However, this chain was connected to Achilles' body. As for the two holy swords, their durability had long since reached its limit. They turned into magic power and disappeared within the pillar of light. What? It's actually this guy. Sodric, if you have the ability, let go of me. Achilles became even more agitated, as if he had seen an old enemy. I didn't expect you to be summoned here. Karen also had a face full of emotion. However, he still did not lower his bow and arrow aimed at Wuming. After all, this continent was too chaotic. Including them, there were a total of 6 forces. Who knew which side this old friend in front of him was on? In the face of their words, it was Wu Ming who was dumbfounded. What's going on? It was rare for them to have memories of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen. Or were they the servants of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen? After all, Sodric had only appeared during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen. Wu Ming, who had to deal with the 2 great restraining forces, had already set a rule that his servant image could not be sent out without his permission. Since Karen and Achilles recognized him, then they either had memories of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen or were the servants of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen. But how did they recognize me when they didn't see my face? Could it be through my voice? Wuming began to think again. Karen had indeed recognized Wuming's voice, but Achilles had only reacted after seeing Wuming's armor. As if thinking of this, Wuming looked at his armor in relief and understood. This armor was basically the same as the armor Wuming wore during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen, but the armor worn by Wuming during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen was not as bright as this armor. There was also the addition of a helmet. However, with Wuming's voice, it wasn't impossible for Achilles and Sharon to recognize him. But since Karen and Achilles both had memories, why didn't Atlanta recognize him? Or did she recognize him but didn't want to say it? As for Spartacus, that guy doesn't care who you are. As long as you are an oppressor, I will beat you, regardless of whether you are an enemy or not. And while Wuming was thinking, Achilles looked at the silent Wuming and was a little impatient. Hey, say something. Karen was also thinking silently. Could it be that Sodric didn't have memories of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen like him and Achilles? Achilles' roar made Wuming come back to his senses. Sorry, I just didn't expect you to have memories of that time, so I fell into deep thought for a moment. Wuming's voice came from under the helmet again. Kaka! Then, Wuming controlled the helmet to open. It's good that you still remember. Was the spying just now you, or was it your partner? Karen began to question Wuming. After all, if there was no hostility, spying secretly was not appropriate. However, even if they were enemies, Sodric's actions made Achilles and even Karen slightly disdainful. After all, in their eyes, Sodric was a person of importance. How could he be reduced to the point of peeping? But if you say you were peeping, then so be it. Your skills were so bad that you were discovered in an instant. Aren't you embarrassed? Wuming naturally didn't feel embarrassed, although what he did was a little shady. After all, passing by here had aroused Wuming's interest, so Wuming didn't know how to explain it. He couldn't say, "I was just looking around because I was interested," or something like that. "I passed by here and sensed the presence of many servants in this town, so I did a simple check. I didn't expect to be discovered by you." Wooming didn't even blush as he spoke about his peeping so openly, but he didn't expect that a simple scan of the mecha armor would be discovered by Karen. "Just now, I sensed someone spying on us through the mind's eye, so I went ahead with Achilles and came out to take a look. Master will be here soon. If you want to run, do it now," Karen calmly said to Wooming. "Hey, Sensei, how are you going to cover this guy?" Achilles asked, puzzled. "I'm not covering his escape. After all, even if Chaldea's master and other servants come, if Sadric wants to run, I don't think our chances of catching him are high." Karen didn't care about Wooming's presence and said directly to Achilles. And there was something else Karen didn't say. "Especially since you, the strongest of us, are still bound by the celestial lock." Sharon, who was highly intelligent, had guessed what Wooming was talking about when he heard about the chains of divinity. After all, the only silver-white noble phantasm that was tighter and tighter to the divine chain was the celestial lock. Although Karen was also very curious about where Wooming got the celestial lock. As he raised his eyebrows, Sharon continued to stare at Wooming. Then he realized that Wooming was smiling. "Hey, the master of Chaldea you mentioned, is it the orange-haired little girl called Fujimaru Tachika?" Then, seeing Achilles' expression of, "How did you know?" Wooming got his answer. Looking at Gadatsi, who was escorted by a group of servants in the distance, Wooming loosened the chain that bound Achilles. Chapter 484. Gadatsi didn't know what to do at the moment. With the help of many servants, they finally passed through 3 singularities and retrieved 3 Holy Grails. Just when they were about to retrieve the Holy Grails after defeating all the enemies at the 4th singularity, the person behind the scenes who caused the burning of humanity actually came out in person. Because of Mr. Anderson, we managed to get a lot of information from him, but in the end, we didn't know what happened to the Magic King. He actually wanted to kill us directly. Pamela, Matthew, and even Mordred couldn't move in front of that guy. Is it going to end? Then, I was saved by Assassin, who I met in winter with City Singularity. I was really happy, and so was Matthew. As for Pamela, although she didn't show it, because of Assassin's arrival, she also relaxed. And it seems that Mordred and Assassin have an ill-fated relationship. I'm really curious. After that, although I didn't understand the conversation between Assassin and Magic King, in short, the two of them are enemies. Then, after some twists and turns, the Holy Grail of the Singularity was also recovered. Then, unexpectedly, Assassin also followed us back to Chaldea. Although I wanted to talk to Assassin, my body couldn't support it. In order to go to the next Singularity, I had to sleep first. Anyway, Assassin also said that he would accompany me to the next Singularity. As a result, when I woke up, the doctor said that because something happened, Assassin left. How can I be so unlucky? But fortunately, the doctor said that although Assassin couldn't go with us to the next Singularity, he will go back, and there will always be a chance to meet. Then, because Assassin provided the coordinates of the next Singularity, it didn't take long for me and Matthew to prepare to enter the next Singularity. On the contrary, Pamela still didn't wake up, but it didn't matter. Matthew was already very strong. After entering the frame, when we were about to perform the ray shift, the doctor suddenly whispered a few words. Maybe in this singularity, he will come with a special identity. The cowardly doctor said something that made himself puzzled. Special identity? Could it be that the spirit base is no longer Assassin? I've been prepared for this for a long time. No matter how stupid I am, I can see that Assassin is not an ordinary servant. Can an ordinary servant compete with a crown magician and force her to leave? He was really looking forward to it. With that in mind, Matthew and I entered a new singularity, the American continent. Then, he was stunned by the scene in front of him. There were Roman soldiers with similar faces and Dragonfang soldiers, as well as Caligula and Hercules, who had been defeated before. Moreover, Hercules and Caligula seemed to still remember him as they roared and charged towards him. What was going on? Fortunately, A strong light suddenly appeared in another place, attracting the two great gods. Now he and Matthew could escape. As for where to escape to, of course, to the other side of the light. The light seemed to be emitted by a powerful servant, plus Hercules and Caligula were attracted to it. If he wanted to live for 2 more years, of course, he would run in the opposite direction of the light. Although these Dragonfang soldiers and Roman soldiers were not weak, Matthew was also very strong. After a while, we escaped. We happened to meet Mr. Geronimo, who was observing the enemy on the edge of the battlefield. Fortunately, Mr. Geronimo was a good person. After knowing his identity as the master of Chaldea, he invited him to join. Anyway, after asking the doctor's opinion, Matthew and I joined the team to save the United States and expel those foreign enemies. Later, Mr. Geronimo took him and Mashu to their temporary gathering place, Riverton, where they had no master or servant. Wow, there were a lot of servants here: the American outlaw Mr. Billy Boy, the faceless king Mr. Robin Hood, and Miss Elizabeth. Although Miss Elizabeth was very happy to see me, when I thought of Elizabeth's singing, well, it seems that Mr. Sharon and Mr. Achilles are very strong. As for why they called him Mr. Sharon, because Mr. Sharon is Mr. Sharon. In addition to these, there was also Miss Nightingale, who was known as the Angel. It was said that she was treating a seriously injured and unconscious servant. I don't know why everyone was afraid of the treatment. In any case, including Matthew, there were now a total of 9 servants around him. He gathered so many companions at the beginning. This was a treatment that he didn't get in the previous singularity. Later, because Geronimo needed to continue to investigate the situation of other forces, he took Mr. Robin Hood and Mr. Billy Boy out. On the contrary, he was quite puzzled about the problem of other forces. Was there a lot of forces in this singularity? This was different from the previous singularities. Later, Mr. Sharon answered his and Matthew's doubts. According to the current intelligence, the continent was divided into 5 regions: Washington, Chicago, Alexandria, Salt Lake City, and San Francisco, with these 5 cities as the center spread to the surrounding areas. At present, the United States was divided into such a situation. If they added the alliance of the lone servants, there were a total of 6 forces. After all, they could no longer be underestimated. The number of nearly 10 servants was not worse than the other forces, and their 6th force occupied the places that the other 5 forces did not occupy, including Riverton, where she was now, which was the base camp of the lone servants. Apart from that, each force had a powerful background. According to Master Karong, they had not caused any trouble these days. Instead, they had been collecting information. They had discovered that these 5 forces were made up of mythical or historical figures from various countries: Celtic, Greek, Roman, Japanese, and the native forces of the United States. And in addition to the native forces of the United States, the other 4 forces had the Holy Grail. Now that I think about it, the Magic King said that he had prepared a gift for Assassin. Could it be these? But I always felt that it was not for Assassin, but more like it was for me. Although it was hard to believe, but I have to accept the fact that I need to defeat these 4 forces after learning from Mr. Sharon. The sky was dark, and of course it was time to sleep. As a result, in the middle of the night, I was awakened by the unexpected arrival of the servants. Kaioheim, who sneaked down from the Rocky Mountains, and Spartacus, who rebelled against Rome. Looking at the 2 berserkers in front of me, I felt powerless for a moment. This was the same as the nurse. They were both problematic servants. However, as long as I found the berserker's preference, it was easy to get along with them. I just had to compromise with them, and then they readily agreed. Spartacus' compromise was easy to deal with, but Kaioheim actually asked to be with her all the time, the kind of skin contact which gave me a headache. But fortunately, Kaioheim also accepted the treaty that they could only hold hands during the day and not touch at night. Looking at Kaioheim's eyes, I always felt that she would lose her virginity, like what Matthew told me. The next day, Ms. Pomilio woke up, and the doctor also sent her through the frame. This time, our 6th force can be regarded as strong, with more than a dozen servants. Later, under the discussion of Geronimo, Mr. Sharon, and the doctor, the current combat mission was set. Tomorrow, we will go to the westernmost force of the United States and ask for an alliance. After all, they don't have the Holy Grail, and the two sides don't need to be hostile, so we choose to ally first. Then, after familiarizing himself with everyone, night arrived. While preparing for tomorrow's itinerary, Mr. Sharon sensed that someone was investigating them. In this way, Spartacus, who had already discovered it, because he was the closest to the person who was investigating them, he ran over without permission. As expected of a berserker, Mr. Sharon and Achilles also went first. After all, the enemy was in the light, and Spartacus might be in danger. Later, I also pulled Matthew and others toward that position. In the distance, I saw Achilles was tied up in chains. This was really bad. After all, even the strongest among them, Achilles, was tied up by that shining silver enemy. But when I walked closer, it turned out to be Assassin. Assassin seemed to have seen me as well. She loosened the chains that bound Achilles and even waved at me. Really, it turned out to be a family member who beat up another family member. In any case, Assassin did not break her promise. Anyway, let's hug first. Chapter 485. Wooming loosened the chain that bound Achilles. When he saw Gadotsi, he knew that he couldn't fight, so he put the two chains directly into the golden ripple. Then, looking at Gadotsi, who ran all the way to him, Wooming quickly touched the armor and hugged her. Big and Jun Woo Kyoheim, who originally wanted to stop Gadotsi, was instantly dragged to the back by Elizabeth, who was rolling her eyes. Okay, don't mess with them. Can't you see that Xiaolu is very happy? Why, Elizabeth said with a smile. Kyoheim stared at Why Elizabeth angrily, as if there was fire in her eyes. Looking at Why Elizabeth's evil smile, how could she not know the female lizard's thoughts? It was nothing more than her. Woo. You female lizard. Just you wait. Yes. Assassin, you're here. Gadotsi hugged Wooming and shouted happily. As for Wooming, he dotingly patted her little head as if he was hugging his daughter. Aren't you afraid that you'll knock into something? My armor is very hard. With your small body, what if you break it by pouncing on me like this? But I believe that you won't let me get hurt, Assassin. It can only be said that Wooming's reliability made Gadotsi believe that she will not get hurt. Wooming could only smile helplessly. Okay, come down first. Matthew is still watching. Wooming patted Gadotsi's little head. Gadotsi also realized this and hurriedly got down from Wooming's body. He came to little Eggplant's side and smiled shyly. Matthew didn't care about anything, but he was quite puzzled. Senpai, you and Assassin Senpai have a good relationship, but you have only met a few times. Huh? Really? I feel okay. When Matthew said that, Gadotsi didn't care and said casually. Instead, Wooming fell into deep thought. Matthew was right. He and Gadotsi have been together for less than a week. How can the two of them feel like family? However, after all, it was not the time to talk. Wooming looked at the pitch-black surroundings and said immediately, "Let's get out of here first. This is not a place to talk." Other servants saw the relationship between Wooming and Gadotsi and immediately put down their vigilance against Wooming. After all, they just wanted to peek. Even if they wanted to explain, this was not the place to talk. So, they returned to Riverton's house. After returning to the house, only Sharon, Matthew, Gadotsi, and Wooming were left at the scene. After all, the sixth force had already been planned, and such things like discussing the plan were handed over to Sharon and Geronimo. But now that Geronimo was not there, then it was handed over to the great sage Sharon. After all, Karen's name was enough to convince everyone. Kyoheim was forcibly suppressed by Why Elizabeth, Robin Hood, and Billy Boy, because Kyoheim and Gadotsi signed a magic treaty provided by Da Vinci. So as long as Kyoheim wanted to touch Gadotsi at night, her power would be suppressed. But in fact, even if there was no power suppression, it was okay, because this berserker's strength was only E. However, Kyoheim's desperate resistance made even Wooming slightly surprised, but he didn't know why Kyoheim kept staring at him. Wooming was confused. Of course, This was what Gadotsi ordered Elisabet and the others to do. Gadotsi saw that Wu Ming was in a good mood, and obviously, she didn't want to spoil Kyoheim's mood. Pamelia saw that it was Wu Ming, and then she left with an uninterested look. Achilles, on the other hand, snorted and left. It seemed that Wu Ming's dirty trick of binding Achilles made him very unhappy. However, since it was related to his master, Achilles didn't say anything else. Then, Wu Ming explained his matter and told them that he was now Cylinder. So, that is to say, you're not Sodric now. Sharon deliberately emphasized the word now. Sharon already knew that Wu Ming was definitely not an ordinary servant, at least not as simple as it seemed on the surface. Cylinder? I feel more familiar with the name Assassin, and I'm not familiar with history, so I don't know this name. Matthew, do you know it? Gadotsi was not familiar with mythology, so she wasn't familiar with the name Wu Ming said. The name Cylinder, seems to be a character in the Long March. Matthew stayed in the sterile room all year round, so he read a lot of books, and he also knew some things about Cylinder, but not all of it. Now, let's let the genius explain. Suddenly, a rather cheerful female voice came. Then, the communicator on Gadotsi's wrist emitted a light, and a virtual electronic screen appeared, but this time it was not Roman's figure, but a woman wearing a 15th or 16th century European trench coat, with a mechanical arm on her left arm, and a strange staff with a hexagonal crystal at the top. After seeing this face, Wu Ming was shocked. Isn't this Mona Lisa? Da Vinci's wife? Obviously, Gadotsi and Matthew were also shocked by the appearance of this Mona Lisa. Cough, cough. Da Vinci's wife. On the other hand, Wu Ming was relieved when he heard the name Mona Lisa. Da Vinci was Mona Lisa, so it wasn't that hard to accept. Hee. After all, this was a world of magic, and science didn't work here at all. Da Vinci's wife, stop messing around. This time, it was Roman's voice, and along with the shaking of the virtual screen, Da Vinci disappeared on the screen, and Roman's cowardly face appeared instead. Sure enough, when I see this face, I subconsciously hate it. Sharon frowned, and then forced himself not to look at Roman, and only listen to his voice. Even the great sage said that. Roman was disappointed, and put on an expression that said, I can't do it anymore. Wu Ming estimated that if it weren't for the fact that he couldn't move freely, Roman would have lost his balance. Doctor, please get to the point. Matthew coughed and said sternly, That's right, doctor. Since it's always the same evaluation, you should accept it. Gadotsi's words were like a sharp sword that pierced Roman's body. Fortunately, Roman wasn't as unreliable as he looked. Ahem, okay. Roman sorted out his thoughts and began to explain. According to the history books, Cylinder was an orphan picked up by Skahar. He was Skahar's younger brother, and also Skahar's first disciple. Not only did he inherit Skahar's martial arts, but he also learned all the Lune runes. If we were to really count, he should be stronger than Cuchulain. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was the strongest warrior in Celtic. Assassin is that strong? The title of the strongest warrior in Celtic shocked Gadotsi. However, Roman's words made Wu Ming feel that something was wrong. Chapter 486. The reason why Wu Ming felt that something was wrong was because of the origin of Cylinder that Roman mentioned. As an abandoned orphan, he was adopted by Skahar. However, considering that the records in the future were not complete, and that Wu Ming and Skahar were considered siblings, Wu Ming did not intend to deny Roman's words. Then, in the face of Roman's words about being the strongest in the Celtic kingdom, Wu Ming smiled casually and said, The title of the strongest warrior in the Celtic kingdom, maybe I really deserve it. It was important to note that Wu Ming was talking about himself, not Cylinder. After all, the villa of the Knights of the Round Table was also Wu Ming. Because he had already planned it in his heart, Wu Ming did not intend to tell Gadotsi and the others. So, is this also the reason why Cuchulain called you senior brother? Matthew suddenly realized. Gadotsi and Roman also recalled the time when Cuchulain was a caster at the Winter with Singularity and called him senior brother enthusiastically. Well, in short, that's it. Wu Ming smiled and shrugged. The more he spoke, the more mistakes he would make. It was better for him to keep quiet. But if you were Selander, then you are related to the easternmost Celtic kingdom. Suddenly, Sharon looked at Wooming with a serious expression, as if he was guarding against something. The easternmost Celtic kingdom? What does this have to do with assassin? Gadotsi was puzzled. By the way, although she knew that Wooming was now called Selander, Gadotsi still wanted to call Wooming assassin. Then, Roman spoke. Tachika, do you remember when Geronimo said that there were only two forces fighting? Although she didn't understand Roman's words, Gadotsi naturally remembered what Geronimo had said. Of course I remember. Mr. Geronimo chatted with me during our free time. He said that there were originally only the native forces of the United States and the Celtic forces on this continent. Not long after, the other three forces appeared. That's right. This represents the original history of the United States resistance against the United Kingdom. However, it has become a dispute between the United States heroic spirits and the Celtic heroic spirits, Roman explained. Matthew looked at Gadotsi and Roman on the screen with a puzzled look. Because it was what Geronimo said to Gadotsi when they were chatting, apart from Matthew and Roman who happened to hear it. Even Matthew didn't know about it. After all, I thought that since we're already part of the five forces, I didn't tell everyone about this. Gadotsi awkwardly scratched the back of her head. At this moment, the great sage Sharon spoke up. Satyr is right about that. Then, I believe that Mr. Romani wants to talk about the leader of the Celts, Maeve, that we learned from Geronimo. All I can say is that he is indeed a sage, addressing Romani as Mr. Romani. When Karong said this, it was Wooming who looked embarrassed. What about Maeve? Don't we already know that the leader of the Celtic forces is Maeve? It had to be said that Gadotsi really didn't know much about history and mythology. However, she couldn't be blamed. If it wasn't for some reason or interest, most students wouldn't know about Maeve. At this moment, our little eggplant blushed and quietly whispered into Gadotsi's ear. That, Senior, if the historical records are correct, Senior Selander is the person Maeve loves. Gadotsi looked at the blushing Matthew, then looked at the awkward Wooming. It seemed like this was true. Ahem, you're right, but it's not as simple as you think, Tachika. Wooming adjusted his expression and coughed twice. Selander is right. According to the historical records, Selander didn't accept Maeve's courtship. Roman spoke at the right time. Could it be a one-sided love? Instantly, Gadotsi's mind was filled with a tragic scene. Seeing Gadotsi fall into a reverie, Wooming gave her a karate chop. Although I don't know what nonsense you're thinking, it's definitely not what you think. Is that so? Ahem. Because Wooming didn't use much force, Gadotsi could only hold her head and smile awkwardly. Then, Roman began to tell the story of the long march to seize the bull. Selander finished his apprenticeship in the demonic realm and walked all the way to Connaught. He settled down there and by chance, he saved Maeve, who was the current lord of Connaught. In the end, Maeve stayed behind as a guard. Selander also stayed behind because he had nowhere else to go. Gadotsi and Matthew listened attentively. Sharon didn't interrupt. On the other hand, Wooming nodded. This was in line with his experience. Maeve could be said to be the Greek goddess of beauty, Aphrodite. She played with all the men she met. However, because Selander turned a blind eye to Maeve's beauty, Maeve's competitive spirit was aroused. In the end, because of her willfulness, she started a war with Ulster. The source of the war was the snatching of a sacred bull. After that, there was the story of Selander and Cuchulainn killing each other. In the end, the war ended because Maeve's father, the King of Ireland, interrupted. Selander took the opportunity to leave, and Cuchulainn was killed by Maeve's plot. Maeve was also assassinated because she was immersed in her love for Selander because of Selander's departure. That was the end of the story. Roman briefly described the long march to snatch the bull. It was almost the same as Wooming's experience. Wooming really didn't know what happened after that. With his own long march to snatch the bull, the ending was probably different from the original story. Therefore, Wooming didn't say anything. Actually, the rumors about Maeve and Selander are a little messy. There are a few versions, but this version is generally recognized as the most historically accurate, Roman continued. Wuming nodded in his heart. It was indeed quite accurate. It can be said that the long march to snatch the bowl was caused by Celander. If it wasn't for Celander, I'm afraid there wouldn't be a long march to snatch the bowl. However, Wuming smiled bitterly. You're wrong about that. If it wasn't for me, Maeve would have caused this war because of her selfishness. And Maeve also met two men who weren't swayed by her beauty. One loved her the most, and the other was the most ruthless. Wuming could understand. The one who loved him the most was naturally himself, and the one who was the most ruthless was probably Cuchulain. Cuchulain had delayed Maeve a lot of things. Although Maeve's original intention was to use the war to delay Wuming, the meticulous Maeve must have planned how to make Wuming stay after the victory. In the end, she was delayed by Cuchulain, and Wuming took the opportunity to escape. Speaking of which, I still have to thank Junior Apprentice Brother, Wuming thought. So that's how it is. What Master Karen is trying to say is that Assassin's appearance should be related to Maeve, right? Suddenly, Gadotsi clenched his fist and punched the palm of his other hand. When did Gadotsi become so smart? Wuming looked at Gadotsi in confusion. Chapter 487. Hey. Why are you guys looking at me like that? Is it weird that I know? Gadotsi looked at Roman, Sharon, Matthew, and even Wuming's doubtful and surprised eyes. After all, Tachika, you're not that smart. Roman, on the other hand, laughed out loud. Then, she was shut up by Gadotsi's resentful glare. In fact, there are a lot of things that Roman said are not quite right, but that's generally the case, and this spiritual base is indeed related to Maeve. When Roman talked about the Celtic forces in the easternmost region, Wuming also guessed what Roman wanted to say. After all, this group of servants must have collected a lot of information over the past few days. Yesterday, when Rome and Greece were fighting, a Celtic servant broke into the battlefield. I think you guys also know about it. After Wuming finished, Sharon nodded and replied. Master and Mashu were brought back from the edge of the battle by Geronimo, who was collecting information. And in the end, even here, we saw a big explosion. It's the explosion that's comparable to a nuclear bomb. Fortunately, Matthew and I ran fast. If we were affected, we would really be finished. Gadotsi had a happy expression, and Matthew was also relieved. Although he was very strong, in the face of such a big explosion, even he didn't have the confidence to resist it with his noble phantasm. We have a partner who is injured by the big explosion, and he is still in a coma. But Karen's sentence attracted Wuming's attention. Could it be Rama? Hey, how do you know? Roman shouted in an instant. Seeing Roman's reaction, Wuming laughed. How could he not know? How could he not know about the explosion that he created? Not to mention himself. Even Caesar and Cleopatra, who were very close to the explosion, probably wouldn't have fainted. As a servant's own defense, coupled with the hurricane caused by the big explosion, they probably wouldn't have fainted even if they were injured. As for further outside, even if there were other servants, they wouldn't have fainted. Only Roman, who was the closest to the big explosion and had overdrawn his spiritual base to use his noble phantasm, would have fainted. Therefore, Wuming immediately knew who the unconscious servant was. That being said, Rama wasn't an ordinary person. He had overdrawn his spiritual base to continuously use his noble phantasm. Plus, he was affected by his own supernoble phantasm, but he was only fainted. He was worthy of his opponent in another world. And Sharon guessed something. He looked at Wuming in shock. Are you the servant who caused that explosion? Wuming only nodded his head in response. What? So, the white light was released by you, assassin? Gadotsi was also surprised. She missed the opportunity to meet Wuming for nothing. Then, Wuming told everyone about himself. He was summoned by Maeve to the battlefield between Greece and Rome, killed Caligula, defeated Hercules, rescued Argo, and destroyed it. Then, Rama angrily chased after him and attacked him. His noble phantasm collided with Rama's noble phantasm. As there was too much mana, It directly caused a nuclear explosion. Then he went back to rest for a day and came here. After listening to Wu Ming's explanation, everyone nodded in retrospect. That Rome's berserker is Caligula, the third emperor of Rome and the uncle of the tyrant Nero. Speaking of which, assassin, you were able to kill that berserker so easily. That's pretty amazing, Gadotsi said excitedly. Hearing this, Wu Ming thought, could it be that Gadotsi and Matthew were teleported to the battlefield? How unlucky they were. By the way, Tachika, were you teleported to the center of the battlefield? Wu Ming didn't ask, but he still wanted it. Once he asked, Gudazi's face instantly drooped. Assassin, you don't know. At that time, it was all the doctor's fault. We said that we would be teleported to a safe place, but we were directly teleported to the center of the battlefield. Matthew and I almost died. Fortunately, you led Hercules and Caligula away. Roman, who was being complained about, also had a bitter expression. I didn't have a choice. The magic power of this singularity suddenly changed before you guys entered. The concentration increased by more than a little, almost comparable to the God's generation. Because of this, the teleportation location was wrong. When Roman said this, Wu Ming nodded. After all, the Magic King created 4 holy grails, and the concentration of magic power increased as well. This was also why Wu Ming felt that the air was fresh. However, too high a concentration of magic power could be considered a poison to a modern person like Gadotsi. Fortunately, it hadn't reached that level yet. That's it. Then I've wronged you, Dr. Gadotsi apologized to Roman. Actually, this is also my fault. You must know that justice depends on you. If something happened to you, I would be a sinner. Fortunately, you're fine now. At this time, Sharon, who was distracted just now, came back to his senses. After knowing that Hercules was fine, he was also relieved. After all, Hercules was Charon's disciple, so it was inevitable that he would be worried. Then, Celander, are you our enemy? Sharon said seriously. Mashu and Roman were stunned for a moment, but they quickly reacted. I don't think so. Roman smiled awkwardly. If he was really an enemy, then they had invited a wolf into the house. How can I be an enemy? Since Assassin said that she would help us in the control room, then she must be a partner. Looking at his senior's determined eyes and hearing his senior's indifferent tone, Matthew was stunned for a moment before he spoke. Yes, I believe in Senior, and I also believe in Senior Celander. Sharon smiled when he saw this. Of course, I believe in Celander's character. Otherwise, I wouldn't have allowed you to bring him here. After all, Sharon had a good impression of Wu Ming since he had the memory of the 14 Horsemen battle. But I still have to ask. After that, Sharon looked at Wu Ming again. Wu Ming naturally shook his head. I'm indeed not an enemy. To be honest, the Celtic forces are no longer an enemy to you because the person in charge of the Celtic forces is now me. The place fell into silence. Then, Sharon covered his ears. Hey. The sound penetrated the house and attracted other servants. Sharon removed his hands that were covering his ears and went out to send away the servants that were attracted by the sound of the scream. As expected of a teacher, he had already expected this scream and covered his ears in advance. So, why are you so surprised? Even though Wu Ming was a servant, facing the girl's scream, Roman automatically ignored it. He still couldn't stand it. But one of the 4 bosses that we need to defeat suddenly became one of our own. It's a bit hard to react. Gadotsi smiled awkwardly. For bosses? Wu Ming was puzzled by Gadotsi's words. Chapter 488. According to Master Sharon and Geronimo's information, we know that there are 4 forces that have the Holy Grail, and the way to restore this singularity is to retrieve the 4 Holy Grails. So, we need to defeat the 4 big bosses. Gadotsi said with a smile while looking at Wu Ming. Although it's not wrong to say that, it feels like we're playing a game. Tachika, be serious, Roman said weakly. Hearing Roman's complaint, Matthew felt quite embarrassed, but it was good that his senior could be so cheerful. Forget it, lass. All you need to know is that the Celtic side that I represent is already one of us. Although I can't say that I'm supporting you, I definitely won't hinder you. Wooming replied with a smile as he patted Gadatsi's head hard. All right, can't say that I'm supporting you? This made everyone puzzled. After all, Wooming was the leader of the Celtic side. How could he not support them? Wooming just explained with a wry smile. After all, it's not that easy to command the Celtic servants, unless you use the Holy Grail to forcibly control them. But if that's the case, it's better not to control them. Wooming knew that forcibly picked melons would not be sweet. So for Finn and the others, if they were not willing, Wooming was not prepared to forcibly control them with the Holy Grail. That's right, just not being enemies with us is already a big help. Roman sighed with relief. The Celtic forces were not as difficult to deal with as Greece and Rome. However, as long as Assassin is here, she can be considered a force, Gadatsi said playfully. Roman and Matthew were stunned, but after thinking about it carefully, they realized that it was true. Just like the previous nuclear explosion, except for those first-class servants. No, it should be the top servants who could withstand it. Like Achilles, in theory, he had an immortal body, but if he was in that big explosion, he would probably die. After all, he wouldn't be able to protect his heel from that kind of explosion. However, speaking of helpers, I can find you some. Wooming thought of Athena and the other subordinate gods. Actually, we already have a lot of servants on our side, so there's no need to deliberately look for more helpers. Right now, it's better to retrieve the Holy Grail as soon as possible. Roman was right. If they deliberately looked for helpers, it would have some impact on their next plan. Taking advantage of the situation was fine, but there was no need to do it deliberately. Wooming also nodded. That's true. It is indeed troublesome to summon them. The Skywings relied on the clones of Wooming's 12 clones to form a connection with Wooming, but Celander's spirit base did not have such an ability, so it could only rely on its subordinate gods. Although the subordinate gods also relied on their own ability to summon them, Wooming could also draw a magic circle to summon the clones of Athena, Lancelot, and the others from the world of the Godslayers. However, it would also take some effort. Thinking about it this way was putting the cart before the horse. Then forget it. Actually, Tachika is right. With me around, this trip will definitely be easy. Wooming nodded and patted Gadatsi's little head, causing Gadatsi to giggle and nudge Wooming's hand. It was not that Wooming was arrogant, but Wooming, who had cheated, could retrieve all 4 Holy Grails in a week if he wanted to. Of course, the premise was that the Magic King did not cheat. After all, it was a gift from that guy. Wooming did not think that it was as simple as having a few more servants. In addition, there was also Gadatsi, so Wooming chose to proceed step by step. I was originally going to go through this place to the American forces in the west of the Rocky Mountains to prepare for an alliance. Who would have thought that I would inadvertently spy on Tachika? When Wooming said this, Matthew and Roman also sighed. Gadatsi, on the other hand, looked very happy. This means that I am fated to be with Assassin. He, looking at Gadatsi, who was looking at him with a smile, Wooming also smiled. You said that you're going to the west of the Rocky Mountains. Are you going to unite with Edison? At this time, Sharon, who had sent away the other servants, also came back and happened to hear Wooming's words just now. Yes, after all, only the American forces that originally confronted the Celts did not hold the Holy Grail, so I decided to try to unite with the Lionhead, but then Wooming paused and continued. I don't know about the Edison you were talking about. I just heard from Maeve that the current ruler of the American forces is a Lionhead. Lionhead? Everyone was also stunned. Could it be that Edison is a Lionhead? What's going on? I also learned about Edison from Geronimo. According to the information collected by Robin Hood from the residents, their current president is indeed called Edison. Sharon looked at Wooming and said. Wooming also knew that Sharon must not be lying, so he nodded. And coincidentally, we are also going to unite with Edison. After all, the other party does not have the Holy Grail, so he's indeed a good ally. Sharon continued to talk to Wooming, and Wooming was also happy after hearing this. In that case, let's go together. Sharon also nodded. I also have the same idea. I'm going to only let Master and Matthew go with you. This way, The others can also free up some time. After all, we still have 3 opponents to deal with. Sharon sighed and continued. Although we have a large number of followers, except for Achilles, the other followers have a very low chance of winning against the Greek and Roman servants. As for me, in front of Hercules and the others, I can only follow the rules. We are also relieved to have your help. Wu Ming also understood Karen's words. The followers that Wu Ming saw just now, in terms of real strength, only Achilles, Sharon, and Pamilia could enter Wu Ming's eyes. The others did not bring the slightest sense of threat to him. For example, although Spartacus' noble phantasm was powerful, it was purely self-destructing. Robin Hood, Billy Boy, Geronimo, and the rest were only able to search for enemies. The intelligence they gathered was very reliable, but their combat power was still too weak for their current opponents. As for Elisabeth and Kaioheim, who was just dragged away with her mouth covered, felt like a problem child, and Elisabeth, it seemed that the other followers were afraid of her. Could it be that she was actually very strong? All right, they still had Rama, who was seriously injured and unconscious. If Rama wasn't injured, he would also be a reliable expert. But now, he had become a burden. This was really a case of Tiger being bullied by dogs. Just when Wu Ming was thinking, Gadotsi smiled happily. Good. With Assassin, the journey will be much safer. It was not that Sharon and the others were not helpful. It was just Gadotsi's temporary feeling. Gadotsi did not have any negative emotions, so Sharon was not angry. In that case, you will be on the road tomorrow morning, Sharon proposed. Whether it was Roman, Matthew, or Gadotsi, they had no objection to Karen's proposal. By the way, Rama has not woken up yet. I will go and see him, Wu Ming suddenly said. Chapter 489. Assassin, do you know how to heal as well? Gadotsi said in surprise. I'll have to see it for myself, Sharon said with a smile. Both Mashu and Roman also showed their interest. Roman's words were only because he was the head of the medical department, and Mashu's words were because she had always been interested in the heroes who left their names in history, especially the one who changed from assassin to serene. After all, he had taught a medical expert who had created the elixir of immortality. In terms of treatment, he could not be regarded as a grandmaster, but he could be regarded as a master. However, Wu Ming smiled bitterly and shook his head. I don't know how to heal. I only know some healing magic, but I have a way to cure Rama. After all, it could be said that Romo had become like that because of him. Now that he had another teammate, it wasn't that bad. It was much better than having another burden. But since you want to see it, then let's go together. Later, Wu Ming, Gadotsi, Matthew, Sharon, and Roman came to a house in Riverton with lights on. Along the way, Sharon told Wu Ming that there were humans living in this town, and they were actually the outsiders. However, because of Geronimo, the residents also accepted Sharon and other servants. After all, they could at least protect them. As for why they would protect them, along the way, the lights in the surrounding houses were turned off. After all, this was a matter of course. When Wu Ming arrived, the moon had already risen high in the sky. Servants could not sleep, but Gadotsi could not. It could be said that if it were not for Wu Ming's unexpected arrival, Gadotsi would have fallen asleep long ago. However, Wu Ming's arrival was also an unexpected surprise for Gadotsi. Sharon knocked on the door of the room, followed by the sound of trotting, and the door was opened. What are you doing? Don't you know that the wounded need a rest? The person who came was a woman dressed like a battlefield doctor. She had a pretty face, a red top that looked like a military uniform, a black pleated skirt, white pantyhose, and short boots that reached her calves. She looked like both a nurse and a soldier, giving people a strange feeling. This is Miss Nightingale. She has very special medical skills. Sharon awkwardly introduced her to Wu Ming. Not only Sharon, but even Gadotsi, Mashu, and even Roman on the virtual screen had strange expressions on their faces. On the other hand, Wu Ming was baffled. She looked very normal. It's already nighttime. The wounded need to rest. You should leave quickly. I still have to prepare for the amputation. Nightingale said calmly. According to Wu Ming's knowledge, Rama seemed to be the only injured person here. In other words, this servant wanted to perform an amputation on Rama. Then, Wu Ming heard Gadatsi and Matthew whispering behind him. Hey, 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 aren't there servants taking turns to guard Rama with Nightingale? What's going on? Senpai, have you forgotten? When Senpai Cylinder arrived, almost all the servants had left. Mr. Geronimo did not come back, and Senpai Karen was with us. Just now, Miss Elizabeth, Mr. Robin Hood, and Mr. Billy Boy joined forces to suppress Kyoheim. Usually, they would take turns, but because of what happened just now, only Miss Nightingale is left here. Parmelia and Achilles naturally wouldn't watch Nightingale here to prevent her from doing anything to Rama. Fortunately, we came quickly. Listening to the constant whispering behind him, Wu Ming smiled awkwardly. He finally understood why everyone treated this angelic young lady with such special treatment. Miss Nightingale, hello, nice to meet you. My name is Cylinder. Anyway, let's say hello first. Hello, Mr. Cylinder. Do you need an amputation? Wu Ming was silent for a while. Why do you want an amputation so often? Are you that obsessed with amputation? If that's the case, ahem, it's like this. Achilles needs to be amputated. He specially asked me to invite you over, Wu Ming said in an extremely serious tone. Is that so? I'll go over now. Help me take care of the wounded. Nightingale's eyes lit up, and she immediately returned to her room. A moment later, she walked out with 2 small green bags and walked toward Achilles' house. Anyway, the distance was not close, and it was enough for Wu Ming to treat Rama. Cylinder, you really? Sharon looked at Wu Ming with a dumbfounded expression. Wu Ming also coughed a few times awkwardly. However, Achilles, my good brother, please do me a favor. If Achilles heard Wu Ming's words, he would definitely use his chariot to attack Wu Ming. Matthew and Gadatsi also fell into a reverie. The immortal body that was invulnerable to swords and spears needed an amputation, and the image of Achilles' limbs that Nightingale could not cut off no matter how hard she tried appeared in their minds. The direction, no matter what, Achilles will be fine. Let's go in and take a look at Rama. Wu Ming smiled and then walked in. Sharon also knew his disciple's ability. Nightingale would not really amputate Achilles' limbs, so he stopped thinking about it and followed Wu Ming into the house. Gadatsi and Matthew saw that the 2 of them had entered, so they quickly followed. After all, the 2 of them were here to see how Wu Ming would treat Rama. As for Achilles, ahem, why would a mortal hero be afraid of a nurse? Let's not care about him for now. Just like that, Achilles was unknowingly bought by his teacher and master. After entering the house, Wu Ming followed the magical aura to Rama's room. At that moment, Rama did not seem to have any injuries on his body, but his face was full of sorrow. He was unconscious, and his mouth seemed to be mumbling something. Cedo, my Cedo. At that moment, Wu Ming could only smile bitterly. He did not hate such an infatuated person. Moreover, she was like this because of him. Therefore, he was even more certain that he should save Rama. Rama's spiritual base is quite unstable now. It could disappear at any time. You could say that Rama's firm belief saved him. If not for that, I'm afraid that Rama would have left when he was unconscious, Sharon said beside Wu Ming. Wu Ming nodded and then looked at the unconscious Rama again. Indeed, Rama's belief was probably his wife, Cedo. To put it simply, Rama is extremely lacking in magical power now. If he had enough magical power, he would be able to recover on his own without our help. At that moment, Roman, who had turned off the virtual screen for some reason, turned it on again and projected it in front of Wu Ming. Only magical power? Wu Ming was stunned when he heard that. That seemed to be right. Rama had to rush and release his noble artifact. He had to squeeze out his spiritual base because he did not have enough magical power. If he had enough magical power now, he might not be able to recover immediately, but at least he would not be on the verge of leaving. That's right. Because Rama is unconscious, Tachika can't sign a contract with him. However, even if she did sign a contract, Tachika probably doesn't have enough magical power, Roman said bitterly. Moreover, the other servants don't have much magical power to begin with. Therefore, even if I have a way to transfer magical power to Rama, the magical power gathered by all of us can only keep Rama alive. There's no way to save him at all. Sharon shook his head. Wu Ming secretly nodded in his heart. That was also true. If not for that, perhaps even if Rama was saved by Geronimo, he would have disappeared by now. However, since Rama is lacking magical power, then this treatment will be simple. Wu Ming smiled slightly. Simple. Several people were puzzled. However, Sharon realized something. I lack everything, but the one thing I don't lack is magical power. Chapter 490. After saying that, Wu Ming's body erupted with a huge wave of mana. Matthew and Gadotsi were directly pushed away, and Sharon had to struggle to maintain his body to not be pushed away. Roman's screen, on the other hand, disappeared due to the violent fluctuations of mana. Then, Wu Ming raised a hand in front of him, and countless amounts of mana in his body and the mana released outside of his body converged. Streaks of dark blue mana continuously converged. This was because the purity of the mana was so high that it could be seen with the naked eye, and this made Sharon tremble. Countless amounts of mana continuously condensed in Wu Ming's hand, and not long after, this mana formed a blue high-density mana crystal in the shape of a holy grail. With the appearance of this mana crystal, the wind in the room also disappeared. If not for the traces of chaos in the room and the fact that Gadotsi and Matthew were paralyzed on the ground from the wind, perhaps the wind just now would have been mistaken for an illusion. You recognize this thing, right? Wu Ming weighed the mana crystal in his hand and looked at Gadotsi and Matthew. The two of them stood up in a sorry state, patted their aching buttocks, and nodded. I've seen it before. Chaldea has many mana crystals, but why is yours blue? And it's much bigger than Chaldea's. Gadotsi indicated that her mana crystal was a green cube, and it was in small pieces. There's more to be surprised about next. Wu Ming smiled, and then released his mana again. But this time, the mana released only filled Wu Ming's hand, so Gadotsi did not need to worry about being blown away again. The three of them just watched Wu Ming continue. Pure mana that was visible to the naked eye appeared in Wu Ming's hand. The dark blue mana climbed onto the blue Holy Grail crystal, and as if it was dyed, the Holy Grail crystal began to change color. Surprisingly, when the dark blue color covered the blue mana crystal, it didn't dye it a deeper blue, but a golden color. While he was at it, Wu Ming also smoothed out the edges and corners of the Holy Grail's crystal with magic. Just like that, a Holy Grail appeared before Gadotsi. The Holy Grail? Roman shouted in shock as the virtual screen reappeared. That's not it, Doctor. That's a mana crystal created by Assassin. It's just that it's been dyed with some color. After hearing Gadotsi's explanation, Roman calmed down and used the equipment to analyze the Holy Grail. In the end, just as Gadotsi had said, this Holy Grail was just a magic crystal. However, this was enough for Roman to look at Wu Ming in a different light, because this Holy Grail was indeed an incomplete Holy Grail. After Roman's examination, the Holy Grail, held by Wu Ming, also had an unimaginably large amount of mana. It was almost the same as the real Holy Grail. It could be said that the Holy Grail held by Wu Ming only had the characteristic of having a large amount of mana. Apart from that, this Holy Grail didn't have the ability of the real Holy Grail. However, just this alone was enough to surprise Roman. Just now, due to the influence of the magical fluctuations and the poor signal, the connection between Roman and Gadotsi was directly cut off. However, because Wu Ming's speed of condensing the mana crystal wasn't slow, it only took a few minutes for Roman to reconnect. In other words, Wu Ming created an incomplete version of the Holy Grail in just a few minutes. I'm afraid you're the only one who can do such a shocking thing in just a few minutes. Roman had a strange expression on his face as he said embarrassedly. Roman was naturally referring to Wu Ming's identity, and Wu Ming also understood what Roman meant. Then, looking at Gadotsi, who was staring at the Holy Grail in his hand, Wuming smiled. Then, Wuming threw the Holy Grail in his hand to Gadotsi. Under Matthew's worried gaze, Gadotsi caught the Holy Grail in a panic. There's no hurry to use this on Romo now. You and Matthew could take a look at it. Then, the two little girls, Matthew and Gadotsi, went to the side with the Holy Grail in their hands. They were still very interested in the item that was basically the same as the Holy Grail. After all, every time they retrieved the Holy Grail, they would be directly teleported back to Chaldea, so they were also quite curious. After seeing the two little girls go to the side, Wuming looked at Sharon. When Nurse Nightingale returns, I'll let her use this Holy Grail bit by bit on Romo. As for bit by bit, after all, Romo's body was on the verge of collapse. If too much magic was injected at once, perhaps it would directly shatter. It was like a glass that had been soaked in boiling water for a long time. After taking it out, a large amount of cold water was poured into it. There was no doubt that the glass would explode. Sharon nodded. As a sage, Sharon naturally understood Romo's current situation. It was like a glass soaked in boiling water. Since it's settled, then Tachika and Matthew, you two should go and rest first. It's getting late, and we still have to hurry tomorrow. Gadotsi was an ordinary person, so sleep was very important. Although Matthew was a subservient, he still had human habits. But even if he didn't sleep, Matthew wouldn't be able to last more than a few days. Then, Wuming looked at Gadotsi and Matthew, who were constantly touching the Holy Grail. Hearing someone call him, Matthew's face turned red, and he quickly took his hand away from the Holy Grail. Gadotsi smiled and returned the Holy Grail to Wuming. If that's the case, I also want to close the channel. Good night, everyone. Roman smiled and said good night, and closed the virtual screen. After Wuming gave the Holy Grail to Sharon, he left with the two little girls. Remember where you live? I won't send you off. After all, Wuming didn't know the way, so he didn't want to send them off. Hey, don't, assassin. Matthew, and I miss you. Come with us. Gadotsi instantly pulled Wuming's arm and acted like a spoiled child when Matthew's face turned red. Wuming smiled helplessly and nodded. Well, I have nothing to do now anyway. On the way to Gadotsi and Matthew's residence, Gadotsi kept chatting with Wuming. From time to time, she would act like a spoiled little sister to Wuming. This made Matthew, who was behind them, blushed. After all, this town wasn't that big. Even if Gadotsi deliberately slowed down, they arrived after chatting for a while. All right, hurry up and sleep. Otherwise, I won't bring you along tomorrow. Wuming patted Gudazi's little head dotingly. Matthew, too. Don't delay your sleep because you care too much about your seniors. Even if you're a subservient, you're still a human. Sleep well. Matthew nodded with a red face. Good night, assassin. Then, Matthew and I'll go in first. After Matthew bowed to Wuming, he followed Gadotsi into the room. Wuming, who stood outside the door, didn't leave immediately. Instead, he was thinking about something. Why do I feel that Tachika is getting more and more intimate? She's just like my little sister. Wuming thought about this problem and turned around to leave. In the room, Gadotsi was humming happily as he made the bed for the two of them. Because there weren't many rooms, she and Matthew basically slept in the same bed. After all, Gadotsi couldn't let her little sister sleep on the ground. By the way, Senior is very close to Senior Cylinder. It's just like a brother. Matthew, who was standing behind Gadotsi, said gently, Oh, really? I don't feel anything. I just want to do that. Gadotsi was stunned and smiled slightly. Then, her smile became mischievous. Could it be that Matthew is jealous? Gadotsi looked at Matthew with sneaky eyes. How? How could it be? Matthew instantly panicked. But after seeing the look in his senior's eyes, he understood that his senior was teasing him. In an instant, Matthew's little face bulged like a bun. He pretended to be angry and looked at Gadotsi. Senior, ha ha ha. Okay, let's sleep. We still have to hurry tomorrow. Senior is so annoying. Chapter 491. The night went by silently. Early the next morning, Wuming knocked on Gadotsi's door. The one who opened the door was naturally Matthew, who had the physique of a servant. Gadotsi hadn't woken up yet, and when she saw Wuming, she kept yawning. Wuming smiled helplessly. At this moment, at the west entrance of the town, Wuming, Gadotsi, and Matthew stood on one side, and other servants stood on the other side. Many of Riverton's residents were hiding in the distance, watching from afar. Even if the residents allowed these servants to live here, no matter how kind these servants were, they were not human, and the gap between the two couldn't be closed. Asterisk cough cough. Asterisk returning to the main topic. Everyone was naturally sending Wuming and the other two off. By the way, Pamelia was still sleeping. After all, she was a vampire. Nightingale and Achilles, on the other hand, did not come for some unknown reason. On the contrary, Rama had already woken up and participated in the farewell ceremony. Early in the morning, Wuming would take Gadotsi and Matthew to the west coast of the American continent to unite with Edison. Although it was a bit uncomfortable to give Chaldea's master to a servant who was originally an enemy, since it was Gadotsi's decision, they naturally agreed. Of course, some people were happy, some people were sad, some people agreed, and some people opposed. Kaioheim, bitter sleeve, looked at Gadotsi with tears in her eyes, and then looked at Wuming angrily. She kept looking back and forth. That's enough. It's not a life and death parting. Robin Hood, who was standing on the side, sighed and shook his head helplessly. Billy Boy, who was standing next to Robin Hood, also nodded. Then Elizabeth, who was in her costume, smiled. That's Little Dear's happiness. You'd better send her your blessings. Little Dear was Elizabeth's pet name for Gadotsi. Listening to her enemy's words, Kaioheim was even angrier. Damn stinky lizard. If it weren't for you, Anjin-sama would not fall into the hands of that man. Anjin-sama was Kaioheim's nickname for Gadotsi. At that moment, Kaioheim vented her anger on Elizabeth. Look at how happy Xiaolu is now. It's none of your business. Elizabeth naturally refused to be outdone and stared at Kaioheim. Looks like I have to teach you a lesson in order to win back Lady and Jun's love. Who's afraid of who? When Robin Hood and Billy Boy saw the two girls with dragon attributes staring at each other, they tactfully retreated and kept their mouths shut. On the other side, do you really not need us to send another servant to protect Tachika-sama? Geronimo was still a little worried. This morning, Geronimo, who went out to inquire about information, had returned and naturally participated in the farewell ceremony. Oh, I really don't need it. Assassin is very strong. Gadotsi held Wuming's arm and said with a smile, Believe in Cylinder, Geronimo. Karen's gentle voice came from the side. After all, as soon as Geronimo returned, he learned that the master of his contract would go to Edison with a servant of the Celtic side who had just formed an alliance. This really shocked him. Geronimo looked at Sharon, then looked at Gadotsi and nodded. I'll leave the master to you, Mr. Cylinder. Don't worry. Even if the enemy steps over my dead body, they won't be able to hurt Tachika. Not to mention, the enemy can't step over my dead body. Wuming said to Geronimo and Sharon. And the guarantee of Wuming, who created a nuclear explosion, was naturally enough to convince them. At this time, Sharon also spoke. By the way, Cylinder, Nightingale didn't come back last night. I have ways to treat patients, so I used the Holy Grail on Rama, and the effect was not bad. This made Wuming stunned for a moment. Nightingale didn't go back, and she disappeared this morning. Achilles also disappeared today. Could it be that Nightingale chased after Achilles to do an amputation, and the two of them chased each other away? As if he saw Wuming's doubts, Sharon smiled bitterly. My disciple is indeed missing. I think it might be related to Ms. Nightingale. Sharon purposely went to look for his disciple this morning, and found that his disciple's house was in a mess. The windows were open, as if he was being chased by something. Thinking about it carefully, it might be that Nightingale. After all, she was a berserker. How could a berserker be easy to deal with? Compared to other classes, even an easy berserker was a problem child. This made Wuming feel awkward. Achilles, you are a man after all. How can you let a woman chase after you and run away? Cough, cough. But it was Wuming's fault after all, so it was better not to talk about it. Then, Wuming looked at Rama. Although Rama was already awake, he could still see that he was weak. To use a phrase to describe him, he was strong on the outside, but weak on the inside. But it had to be said that Karen's medical skills were superb. But then again, now that all the tools were prepared, Sharon alone was enough to treat Rama. However, to be able to wake Rama up in one night, Wuming took another look at Sharon. To be able to teach a disciple who created the elixir of immortality, Karen's reputation as a sage was not to be underestimated. This was because Wuming felt that Rama would need at least a few days to wake up after experiencing the magic of the Holy Grail. Just as Wuming was pondering, Rama saw that Wuming did not speak. After hesitating for a while, he pulled a long face and spoke first. "I'm here to thank you. I was reckless when we first met. Thank you for saving my life." Rama was obviously talking about the incident where he threw the relic without hesitation. Although Wuming and Carl were on the same side, Wuming had just been summoned after all. The kidnapping of Sido probably had nothing to do with Wuming. Rama understood this as well. However, as he was too emotional at that time, he ended up harming himself. After all, they are now my subordinates in name. But don't worry, I won't do anything to your Sido anymore. On the contrary, I'll help you to save your Sido. Again, Wuming had a good impression of the infatuated man. If possible, Wuming did not mind helping him. You're right, they're also your subordinates. When I save Sido, I'll definitely have a good fight with you. As expected of a king, he was still quite cool when he calmed down. All right, I'll be waiting for you. Wuming smiled as he extended his hand. Rama was stunned when he saw that. He immediately reacted and extended his hand as well to shake Xian's hand. Gadatsi smiled when she saw that. Both of them seemed to have buried the hatchet. After all, she liked to see them getting along well. If that's the case, there's nothing else. Let's go. Just like that, Wuming led Matthew, who was fully armed, and Gadatsi, who kept waving at everyone as they headed west. Of course, Wu Ming and the rest did not need to walk 108,000 miles, nor did they need to face extreme difficulties. However, I feel like we've overlooked something. Wuming muttered to himself. In the forest near Riverton, Wuming's pseudo-heavenly lock had tied Spartacus up. He was still tied up and could not move at all. "Oh, oppressor, come and give me more pressure." Chapter 492. In the northwest of the Rocky Mountains, a 4 or 5 meter long white deer was jumping on a mountain like a spirit, running towards the west. This white deer was naturally the white deer that Wuming sat on before, the vehicle of the holy spear Yggdrasil. It was neither alive nor emotionless and was completely controlled by Wuming. After walking for a few minutes, Wuming thought that the speed was too slow and threw his spear to the ground. Then, the holy white deer, based on Finbaba, appeared in front of Gadatsi and Matthew. The appearance of the white deer made the two little girls feel good. After all, the white deer's appearance was still good enough. Then, Wuming, Gadatsi, and Matthew rode the white deer. Because of the increase in the number of people, the white deer that Wuming summoned was naturally a little bigger, making it more convenient for the three of them to ride. Wuming sat on the back of the white deer, holding Gadatsi in his arms, while Matthew sat behind Wuming and hugged Wuming tightly. Gadatsi closed her eyes and looked carefully. Her breathing was steady. There was no doubt that Gadatsi had fallen asleep. Wuming saw that Gadatsi was sleep-deprived, so he used hypnosis to make Gadatsi fall asleep. Of course, Gadatsi naturally didn't know that. She just felt very sleepy. So Wuming proposed that he could hold Gadatsi, and Gadatsi gladly accepted. Wuming still used magic to make Gadatsi's senses change. Even in the violent vibration, Gadatsi felt stable, so the constant jumping of the white deer did not affect Gadatsi's sleep. On the other hand, Mashu was a little scared because of the speed of the white deer, so she hugged Wuming tightly. But after a period of adaptation, he got used to it. It was like riding a bus, watching the surrounding scenes receding, but he still hugged Wuming's waist tightly. Matthew's shield was hung on the white deer's tail by Wuming's control. The white deer's tail was like a ponytail. The snow-white long tail tied Matthew's shield, so there was no need to worry about the white deer's running and jumping. After all, the white deer's body was not much bigger, so it was not easy to put a shield on it. The speed of the people riding the white deer was a lot faster. In less than 2 hours, Wu Ming and the other two were about to leave the Rocky Mountains. In this way, we can be considered to have left the territory of the Japanese forces, Wu Ming said lightly. Along the way, Matthew told them about the Holy Grail forces in the Rocky Mountains. According to Matthew, there were no traces of humans in the entire Rocky Mountains. The whole mountain was full of ghosts. There were ghosts with green faces and fangs, and there were also ghosts without bodies. In short, no matter what kind of ghosts they were not something that the humans in the United States could deal with. The ghosts should be the soldiers of the Holy Grail forces. This was what Wu Ming said to himself when he first heard Matthew's explanation. Celtic had Wu Ming soldiers, Greece had Dragonfang soldiers, and Rome had Roman soldiers. Just like other forces, Japan also had its own ghost soldiers. The reason why the residents of Riverton allowed the servants to move in was because of the ghosts attacking the humans. The Celtic and Roman troops were not only soldiers, but they were also far away from here. However, the territories of Japan and Greece happened to be on both sides of Riverton. Moreover, ghosts and Dragonfang soldiers were really like wild beasts. Before the servants lived in Riverton, not only Riverton, but also the residents of the Missouri River Valley often suffered from sparse Dragonfang soldiers and ghosts. They only knew how to use guns, so how could they fight against these enhanced versions of skeletons and ghosts? Naturally, they needed the help of the servants. Later, when Wu Ming asked who the leader of the ghosts was, Matthew shook his head. Matthew told Wu Ming that the one who went to explore the Rocky Mountains was Robin Hood. Because there was no one in the Rocky Mountains, only Robin Hood, who was known as the King of Faceless, had the ability to explore such a place. According to the exploration, Denver was determined to be the gathering place of the Holy Grail forces in Japan. However, he did not enter Denver because Robin Hood had sensed a large amount of poison before he even reached Denver. Robin Hood was also a master of poison, so he was very sensitive to poison. Under the premise of ensuring his own safety, Robin Hood collected some information and left. After that, everyone knew that the Japanese forces were not to be trifled with. At least, not many servants could ignore those poisons. Especially Sharon, who couldn't stand the Hydra's poison and chose to commit suicide. It was estimated that as long as Sharon approached, he would be poisoned to death. Even Kaioheim, who was originally a member of the Japanese forces, didn't know. When Kaioheim was summoned by the Holy Grail again, she didn't even pay attention to the leader of the Japanese forces and directly left the Rocky Mountains. Coincidentally, no one stopped Kaioheim, so she was released. In this way, Kaioheim, who pursued her love, betrayed her original side without any information. Perhaps, because of this reason, Kaioheim was a little more honest. However, in Kaioheim's words, all of this was for love, for Kaioheim's Anjin-sama. In short, even Matthew didn't know the specific situation of the Japanese forces. However, Wu Ming had some idea in his mind. Japan, leader, ghost, poison, he could only think of Shitendaji. I don't know if Shitendaji here has the memory of burning Winterwood City. If so, it would be difficult to deal with. Wu Ming didn't know Shitendaji. Apart from the historical records, Wu Ming only knew that she was a female ghost who could eat people, drink wine, and didn't care about trifles. Yes, and the most important point, she did things completely according to her preferences. If she was persistent, she wouldn't let others feel comfortable even if she died. From the poisonous wine gourd in Winterwood City, it could be seen that Shitendaji, who used all her strength to release her noble phantasm, really disgusted Wu Ming. It really confirmed that sentence. Even if she died, she wouldn't feel at ease. It's better to leave here quickly. Thinking like this, Wu Ming controlled the white deer to speed up a little, wanting to leave this junction quickly. After Wu Ming and others left the Rocky Mountains, in the place where Wu Ming and others were just now, a purple and quite exposed figure appeared. What a delicious smell. After leaving the Rocky Mountains, Wu Ming was temporarily relieved. Fortunately, there was no Shitendaji who blocked the road to rob them. Then, Wu Ming and others entered a flat area that looked like a plain, but was actually a plateau. Chapter 493. In fact, the Cordillera was not the name of a mountain. Its full name was the Cordillera Mountains. To be precise, the Rocky Mountains were also part of the Cordillera Mountains, but in order to distinguish the territories of the Japanese forces and the American forces, the two were separated. The Japanese forces were like a stickler to the rules. They only occupied the eastern Rocky Mountains, the highest part of the Cordillera Mountains, and had no intention of expanding their forces. Otherwise, Maeve wouldn't be unable to find any information. After all, even the servants of Riverton, the neighbor of the Japanese forces, didn't clearly inquire about the Japanese forces. Apart from the Rocky Mountains, which were the tallest and largest, the Cordillera Mountains were left with the Central Plateau Basin and the Western Pacific Rim Mountains. At this moment, Wu Ming and the other two entered the Central Plateau Basin area. At this moment, Wu Ming temporarily stopped the white deer. If I remember correctly, following this river may be a place called Boise. Wu Ming thought and said to Matthew. Gadatsi, on the other hand, was still sleeping that, Senpai Cylinder, I am not very familiar with the terrain here. Matthew's face was slightly red and said slowly. However, Senpai Cylinder was right, Matthew thought. It doesn't matter if you don't know. The point is that we may have to fight with the American forces. Wu Ming narrowed his eyes. Hey, so soon? Do we need to wake Senpai up? Matthew obviously didn't expect to contact the American forces so soon, so he asked Wu Ming if he should wake Gadatsi up. There's no rush now. There's still some distance before we reach Boise. Let her sleep for a while longer. Wu Ming caressed Gadatsi's hair lovingly. Looking at the sleeping face, Wu Ming felt like raising a daughter. Senpai Cylinder is really gentle to Senpai. Matthew didn't know if he was envious or gratified. Seeing Matthew like this, Wu Ming smiled helplessly. Then he spoke to Matthew. Of course, I'm also very gentle with you. Wu Ming raised his hand and stroked Matthew's short hair. After all, Matthew was also a little girl worthy of love. Not to mention, Matthew, you have inherited the power of Galahad. Galahad and I have a special relationship. Wu Ming's words stunned Matthew. Could it be that Senior Cylinder had another identity? Matthew was puzzled. Although Matthew wasn't a particularly smart person, he wasn't stupid either. Judging from the dual identities of Jack the Ripper and Cylinder, he was definitely not an ordinary person. In that case, Galahad was related to him. Could he be a Knight of the Round Table? Then, just as Matthew's thoughts were running wild, Wu Ming spoke again. Of course, even without Galahad's power, I would still be gentle to you. He pressed Matthew's little head a little harder and pulled Matthew out of his thoughts. Then let's go. Let's fight them first. Then, Wu Ming drove the white deer again. The white deer carried Gadatsi, who was sleeping soundly in Wu Ming's arms, Wu Ming, who was full of fighting spirit, and the confused Matthew as they moved quickly toward Boise. When they were still a short distance away from Boise, Wu Ming deactivated the white deer state of the Holy Lance. It wasn't to show his sincerity, but because he had encountered an enemy. Then, a minute later, slash dash, boom dash, the last robot infantry was cut in half with one shot. With the explosion, the 100-man robot infantry unit disappeared from this singularity. Gadatsi and Matthew were stunned as they watched Wu Ming walk out of the explosion with a comfortable expression. From the moment the three of them encountered the 100-man robot infantry unit, Wu Ming gently woke Gadatsi up. Matthew and Gadatsi got off the deer, and the white deer turned into the Holy Lance. It took almost 30 seconds. Then, when Matthew wanted to fight these robot infantry with Wu Ming, they saw how quickly they were dealt with, as if they were vegetables. Strictly speaking, Wu Ming needed to kill at least 3 or 4 robot infantry per second, and that was strictly according to 30 seconds. Of course, it must have been less than 30 seconds. Because in the battle just now, Wu Ming killed more than a dozen robot infantry with one shot more than once. Let's go. It's time to meet the servant. Forget it. It's over anyway. With this in mind, Gadotsi and Matthew smiled awkwardly, then followed Wu Ming to Boise. After walking for almost a minute or two, Gadotsi and Matthew noticed the fortress-like town in front of them, and a white-haired man holding a golden lance and wearing golden armor standing alone in front of the fortress with his eyes closed. Karna. Gadotsi and Matthew didn't know this person. After all, Gadotsi and Matthew didn't see Karna when they were in Winterwood City. At the beginning of the battle between Karna and Gilgamesh, Gadotsi naturally didn't have the chance to see it. Later, when everyone went to the Yuzong Mountain, Karna only appeared to snipe Gilgamesh, but he was quickly rescued by Marshal Gilda Rice. After that, because of Astrio's noble phantasm, Gadotsi and Matthew didn't see Karna. After that, Karna was eliminated by Gilgamesh. It had to be said that this was a really sad story. Because of this, when Gadotsi and Mashu saw the white-haired man with golden armor and golden spear, they didn't recognize him. However, this didn't prevent Wu Ming from knowing Karna. Whether it was the Battle of the 14 Riders or the burning Winterwood City, Wu Ming had contact with him. In the Battle of the 14 Riders, Wu Ming defeated Karna by cheating. In Winterwood City, because of his rank, Gilgamesh replaced Wu Ming to fight Karna and defeated him in the end. Wu Ming wanted to laugh. He was almost the same as Zhou. He was on the opposite side of Karna, and he was always beating Karna. However, to be able to meet Karna 3 times outside the Martyr's Palace, it could be said that it was fate. He just didn't know if this Karna had Wu Ming's memories. However, Garna of Fuyuki City has the memories of the battle between the 14 Riders and the 14 Riders, because Wu Ming felt that Garna also has the memories of those 2 battles. Sure enough, you are also in this singularity. Karna opened his eyes and looked at Wu Ming. Sure enough, Karna remembered Wu Ming. I didn't expect that we would meet again. It's really fate, Karna. Wu Ming smiled. Karna also nodded, then looked at his hand that wasn't holding the spear. Yes, the identity of a servant can really make such miracles happen. When Wu Ming and Karna were chatting, Gadotsi was indeed shocked. Karna, the god-killing hero who was defeated by the Hero King before I even met him. Now I see him in person. After all, she didn't see his real face last time, so Gadotsi was quite regretful. Indeed, I can feel a very dangerous aura from Mr. Karna. It's like the fire of the sun that can burn everything. Matthew said solemnly as he sensed the magic power that Karna was gradually emitting. He was ready to protect his master with his shield. By the way, I feel that Karna and Assassin are close. Why don't you do us a favor and let us pass? Gadotsi looked at Karna with a smile. Is this the master of Chaldea? Although he looks trustworthy, he's still a bit immature. Karna glanced at Gadotsi expressionlessly. Then, Karna waved his golden spear at Wu Ming. I've already accepted Edison's request and worked for him. He asked me to guard this place. Gadotsi, who felt that things are going to fall through, looked a little depressed. But if it's him, I can let him pass. It seemed that Karna had some understanding of Wu Ming after many competitions, and it was a positive understanding. Just as Gadotsi's sadness turned into joy, Karna spoke again. But it's rare for us to meet. It's not right to let him pass without a fight. With that, Karna rushed at Wu Ming. Then, Gadotsi's face turned green. She felt like she had been tricked. To put it bluntly, we still have to fight, right? I'm already prepared. Wu Ming laughed and faced the incoming Karna. The third battle between the scorching golden spear user and the holy silver spear user had begun. Chapter 494. Clang, clang, clang. The ear-piercing sounds of metal colliding echoed in the air. Huff, huff, huff. Flames raged on the ground in front of the main gate of the fortress like meteorites falling from the sky. The walls of the fortress nearby also showed signs of damage. As if the air was vibrating, countless rays of light and flames clashed with each other. The figures of flames and meteors kept intertwining. The tip of the spear accompanied by flames and the tip of the spear accompanied by holy light could be vaguely seen. Obviously, that was where the sounds of metal colliding came from. Due to Karna's sudden attack, Wuming didn't back down and counterattacked. This battle implicated Matthew and Gadatsi for no reason. This was because as long as Gadatsi showed the attitude of negotiating with him, Karna would definitely not attack again. However, this time, Wuming was involved. Although he had joked that Wuming was like Zhou to Karna, in fact, Karna did have some feelings for him. After all, even a saint would be prejudiced if he kept losing to the same person, let alone Karna. As a result, Karna and Wuming fought for the third time. Both the overflowing magic power and the airwaves caused by the battle affected a shield on the battlefield. The shield kept shaking and seemed to be in danger. Ugh! Matthew put his shield in front of him and struggled to resist, protecting Gadatsi behind him. The blade of the shield extended out from the bottom and stabbed deeply into the ground. One could vaguely see a thick layer of magic power attached to the shield. It was Matthew's magic defense skill, which had the same nature as magic release, except that magic defense was used for defense, while magic release was used for attack. However, even so, the current situation was quite bad for Matthew. Karna's sudden attack during the conversation and Wuming's counterattack were all carried out under the premise that Gadatsi and Matthew hadn't retreated to a safe range. In the beginning, Karna paid attention to Gadatsi's safety. After all, he wasn't a criminal. Wuming was the same. His love for Gadatsi naturally made Wuming pay attention to Gadatsi's safety. However, the two of them were extraordinary figures after all. Originally, they wanted to hold back, but now, it became a battle where they gradually increased their strength. Realizing that she might get hurt if she continued to watch, Matthew wanted to take Gadatsi further away. However, before Matthew could take Gadatsi out of the danger zone, the aftermath of flames, holy light, air waves, and storms swept over. It was precisely because of this that the city walls of Boise City had become so dilapidated. Now, Gadatsi could only hide behind Matthew's shield. Once she left the protection of a shield, Gadatsi would probably be blown away in an instant. At this time, Roman, who was paying attention to this place, turned on the virtual screen and projected it to Gadatsi's side. Sure enough, Serene and Karna are both exceptional servants. The aftermath of a battle of this level can't be ignored. Roman said to himself and nodded. Doctor, you better not talk too much. Can't you see that Matthew is already having a hard time? Gadatsi looked at the virtual screen beside her with disgust. Yes. Just by being called out by Gudazi, Roman had once again returned to his cowardly and timid appearance. However, Gadatsi could shout from here, which showed that Matthew was well protected. However, even if she could only be protected, Gadatsi wouldn't just stay behind Matthew. Now, Matthew's hand holding the shield was already covered by Gadatsi's hand. Feeling the warmth of Matthew's hand, although his body was very tired, Matthew's heart was incomparably firm. Although it seemed that Matthew couldn't hold on any longer, his shield could still continue to resist the aftermath of the two exceptional servants. There was nothing that the sacred round table couldn't resist. Doctor, is there no way to stop them? Gadatsi roared like a child. However, this was a last resort. Although they didn't know why Boise City had become a steel fortress, the steel fortress had collapsed under the battle between Wuming and Karna. That's right, the walls of the fortress that was in good condition just now had been broken, and a few mechanical infantry could be seen faintly falling down. Not only that, but the ground where Matthew and Gadatsi were standing also began to crack. If they waited for Wuming and Karna to fight for a while longer, there was no doubt that the two of them who had released their noble phantoms would destroy the fortress. What can I do? Roman scratched the back of his head weakly. At this moment, Wuming and Karna separated, and the fight naturally stopped. However, this also proved that the two of them weren't too immersed in the joy of fighting. If we don't release our noble phantoms, we won't be able to determine the winner in a short period of time, Karna said lightly. After all, during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen, Wuming and Karna couldn't determine the winner in terms of martial arts, so they still had to rely on their noble phantoms. When he said that, Gadotsi, Matthew, and Roman were shocked. If he released his noble phantoms, Gadotsi and Matthew would be in trouble. Even so, you and I don't want to release our noble phantoms, right? Wooming threw the spear in his hand, and the spear turned into white light and merged into his body. That was not the real holy spear Yggdrasil, but a noble phantoms based on the identity of the Holy King. After all, the real Yggdrasil was still in Uruk. Moreover, this time, it's not pure martial arts. Your flame and my light are not simple things, just like this. Wooming raised one of his hands, and a white light emerged. However, unlike the holy light in the past, this time, the light in Wooming's hand was full of cruel charm. Just like the church organization in fantasy novels, there were many gentle and amiable church members, but there were also church members who were responsible for judgment. At this moment, Wooming's light was in such a form. This time I won. Wooming smiled slightly at Karna. After Wooming finished speaking, Karna did not answer, but fell into silence. I feel that Assassin's aura is a little different. It's a bit serious. Is it an illusion? Gadotsi approached Wooming and looked at the light in confusion. Maybe it's really like what Senpai Celander said. These lights are not simple things. Matthew also came over. Matthew and Gadotsi, one on the left and one on the right side of Wooming, looked at the light. At this moment, Matthew had already put down his shield, and the two had already begun to move toward Wooming. Some of the conversation between Wooming and Karna naturally fell into the ears of Gadotsi and Matthew. Indeed, the current you is somewhat different from the two you that I met before. This time, I have indeed lost. Cough, cough. After that, Karna coughed and blood came out of his mouth. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.